Can I just ask, with the footage that you're taking, what will it be used for, and can I get a guarantee that you won't put it on your blog and selectively edit?
Yes, insurance, to make sure we don't get the same job as selling pollen, Chris Maltnet, unmet by BBC Crew.
So,
This debate is so hostile, and I really wish it would be polite. And I write on my blog all the time about the importance of sticking to the evidence and about how it should not be about ad hominem attacks. So I look like a real hypocrite if I turned around and did an ad hominem attack on someone, because to me this should be, the climate's important and we should be discussing the evidence and what goes on with it. We really just want to make sure that I guess we're not taken out of context and that our arguments are put in their full picture. Hopefully we never even use it.
so you won't be able to use that footage without me signing a release for it versus the usual practice?
Well, I mean, we've signed releases, haven't we, all?
Well, we haven't signed it, we've got releases ready for you to sign.
It's just the same for everyone.
Yeah.
And
But
so,
Sorry,
But
you
you-
said
but
want
you-
me to sign
and
a
are you
release
seeking
for
a-
your blog?
No, we're
well,
not
we
going to
don't
use it.
really, we don't want to use it. We just want to make sure it's insurance in case we got selectively edited and we get quoted as doing something which is out of context.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that this
We won't be
debate
using it at
has
all
got to the
until the
extent-
ABC airs this.
And
And
hopefully,
even then we might edit it. I mean, it's just, it's there as an insurance job.
hopefully this will
Could you-
be
yeah.
the first real documentary which discusses both sides of the story at the same time, which would be fantastic and that'd be groundbreaking. And that's it, that's the end of it, and we keep everything covered.
your concern is any editing of it, Anna, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I've obviously agreed to be filmed by the ABC and signed a release for them, but in terms of signing a release for you, we just rocked up and some man who I've never met, with respect, I'm sure he's a really nice person, but just suddenly comes out with a video camera and starts filming me. I haven't signed a release, I don't know who he is, I don't know why he's there. I mean, it's a bit creepy.
Yeah, look, I'm really sorry that it comes down to this. We're just called skeptics. We don't like to take on faith or trust. We just want to have a backup copy for our own sake to protect our reputations, and that's all we're using it for.
What if you were to agree in writing that, were you ever to use it, it would only be used in full?
Yes, that's
You
right.
know, that you give an
That's-
absolute guarantee
yeah, all right,
in
then.
writing, there would never be
Yeah,
put on.
that serves the insurance purpose
Yeah,
without.
it would only
without
ever show
needing
in
it
full.
to make-
Maybe there's something you
Okay.
could draw up, you know, because that would be your legitimate concern, isn't it?
I'd look like a
It was
complete
edited.
hypocrite
Yeah.
if I
But if it's shown in
selectively
full,
cherry
then-
picked and edited
Oh, that's a
you,
good thought. Yeah, that will.
Yeah.
It's not-
That satisfy you?
You're
which
right.
means you'd have access to it too.
If you
and-
guys
Yeah.
agree
And you
with
could
the-
draw up you could draw it up, you know, whatever agreement you want signed, but they would only ever use it, you know, hopefully they would never use it, but it would only ever be used in full,
Mhm.
you know, and they'd be in breach of.
Well, if you're happy to agree, you're only using
Yeah,
it
yeah.
for-
We'll write it up now and sign it. You want to do it? Can we start? After we can do it.
Well, we can do it at the end.
Yeah, fine.
Okay.
Because we don't have long anyway.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right, that's great. Yeah, thanks guys.
All right.
And hi, I don't believe we've actually met,
Oh,
but
sorry,
you two
Barry,
are
talk.
Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Rose. Barry.
Good to meet you.
Barry?
Yep.
What was your last name?
Cork.
Barry Hawk. Hi. And I guess you know everyone else.
Yep. No, I haven't actually met Nick. I've been busy with the camera.
Yeah, consent.
Yeah.
If it's made available to anyone apart from us, if it's the whole thing, it's not edited in any way.
Yeah,
Well,
Right, so it's either a full recording of everything that happened or
that's
nothing.
right, that's right, that's it. That's all we want.
Okay.
Great.
Guys, I might just stop for a second and get where everyone's standing.
Yep.
Helen?
Doesn't worry me which way
Don't worry you.
flip side here, but yeah, just open a little bit of space.
Sorry,
maybe,
yeah.
so, you know,
Yeah,
so
fine.
maybe
And
If that's
to
okay,
the
yeah.
left, here, it's going to be on this
Just
side.
come a tiny bit
This
around.
And thank you
Yeah.
very much. And the two of you would like to build the trust together, please?
Oh,
No, just
sorry, yeah.
together.
Come on.
we're going to do this all standing up, I think.
I don't think we'll be here that long if you're
well,
comfortable.
Yeah,
maybe.
maybe.
Yeah, got 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's fine, I can manage that.
Just have a little break to come and fetch the kids from school.
Right.
Now, phones off, everyone?
Yeah.
Mine's on silent. Should I play it?
Silence, okay.
Barry, are you positive, could you come to that position in the middle there by any chance? Is that going to be,
Sorry.
can you come up just onto the level there?
The camera.
Yeah.
So
Is that going
you
to
wanna
fit
fit
there? Yeah, just so you're not in the
yeah, we can.
background of Joe's shot.
As handsome as you are, Barry.
Sorry.
So you're not in the shot?
Oh, well, I can keep out of the way, down here.
Oh, okay, we can just put the camera up here, is that
Oh,
okay? Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. We moved here from Perth in 2003 before the housing bubble had taken off in Perth.
Okay.
And we moved from Canberra, the houses was the parking blocks and came in for $200,000. We were going to rent, we go, oh, we can buy.
Yeah, it was, yeah, that's changed.
Yeah.
You guys both Perth? born and
I
bred?
grew up in Perth. David has grown up in the US and the
Oh,
UK
right.
and Sydney
Okay.
and
Yeah,
Canberra.
right.
Got the World Cup.
You like yeah? Okay.
Helen, just so you know, my sort of Nick's slight profile, so I don't
Yeah.
Profile.
And we've got ours, obviously.
know.
My best profile.
Your best profile,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah. I don't think there's anything to do about that. Let's just go with it.
Before we get started, maybe. Sure. Speaking of housing bubbles, I was interested in one of the things that you were writing around banking and inflation and how that's linked to. Sorry.
I might interrupt just
Oh,
so,
sure.
so we can get into it. Yeah.
Sorry.
But
Sorry.
Come back to that.
Racing time.
Well, we've got to pick up the kids at about 5 to 10 to 3.
Okay.
So we can
yeah.
now or
We
camera.
can do things after they come back, but it'll take
Okay.
10 minutes to get them to come back. So,
Give you
It's
David
a
to
nice
start
big
with.
story.
yeah.
David, I'm just wondering, just to start off with,
Yeah.
can you tell Anna about your background, starting with the fact that you were a climate believer and involved in the Greens? Helen, is Barry okay over there, or do you want him to come up where Leo is? Just he's right in the
Oh, sorry.
maybe up where Leo is.
Behind here.
Yeah, up where with Leo. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, you're good
Let's
there.
see with Leo over here, mate.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
And I used to work for the Department of Climate Change, or it was back then the Australian Greenhouse Office, for about 5 or 6 years doing carbon modelling for them. And I was out there to save the planet. I was also a member of the Labor Party on and off for 15 years. I was a member of Greenpeace. So I was a believer. I thought I was saving the planet, and I thought this problem was a really momentous one that needed solving straight away. As the years went by, I found out more evidence. The evidence supporting it drifted away, and then evidence started accumulating that the man-made hypothesis wasn't true, and so I changed my mind.
Okay. I've read that you were a rocket scientist, but then I couldn't actually find that you worked on rockets. But can you explain?
Yeah, that's on an ad hoc site called DSMOG. Yes, I did introduce myself as a rocket scientist in an article I wrote for The Australian. The term rocket scientist was used at least when I was there, at Stanford University and a few of the major US universities, to mean someone who did a technical degree, one of the hard sciences, such as electrical engineering, that I did a PhD, and at one of the 4 or 5 leading US institutions.
Okay, but you haven't actually worked with rockets.
No.
Okay.
Although I did do an interview with JPL.
Okay.
And I might let David. Do you want these guys down this way a little bit?
Fraction?
Yeah.
I mean,
just
there's
sneak back
only
there.
a touch, just a touch.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Let's just go with,
Yeah. Fabulous. So, I mean, David, maybe. Sorry, I'll let Joe actually. Joe, can you talk to me about your background? Well, sorry. First, I'll let David tell us about the period over which your views changed.
Yeah, did they change
Oh,
when you were at the Greenhouse Office?
You know, you sort of told me that.
Well, I was aware of the evidence piling up while I was at the Greenhouse Office, but frankly, I didn't really think very much about it. I was sort of in an environment where you just got on with the job. As Al Gore quoted up from Sinclair, it's difficult to make a man understand something if his job depends on not understanding it. But when I finished with the Greenhouse job, which I did for other reasons, I finished it for other reasons.
Tell Anna, not.
And when I finished it, I did look into it a little bit more, and I noticed that the evidence wasn't right. And somewhere around 2006 or so, I noticed it really was quite wrong. And Joanne was a believer at that stage.
I was actually a member of the Australian Greens. It's the only political party I've ever been a member of. So I'm like you, Anna, in that I am concerned about the environment. I'm concerned about doing things sustainably. I worry about the country that we leave for our kids. And, I applaud you for going out there and doing something to follow what you believe in. I mean, congratulations. If only everyone was as active in doing things to make the world a better place. And I even spoke on ABC Radio about how we should be concerned about carbon dioxide and feedback effects. As the ocean warms, it will release more CO2. And then David came to me one day. I'd stepped out of things, taken maternity leave and stopped paying attention to the debate. And David comes to me one day and he says to me, he says, you know, there's no evidence left to support the great global warming scare. And I said, you must be kidding. You've got to be crazy. Of course there is. What about the ice cores? And you would have known the ice cores, wouldn't you? And you've seen the ice core graph. There's one from Vostok. You can't look at this graph and not say, wow, there's something going on with temperature and CO2. We can see clearly that it rises and falls together. You'd have to look at this when this information came out in the early 90s and late 80s and say, wow, we need to look at this and study it. What shocked me was when David said, not only has it been well studied and we've got better data, but the better data shows that the CO2 rises 800 years after the temperature, and that's not controversial, and that's been published in 5 or 6 of the top leading journals between 1999 and 2003. So I downloaded the data and I graphed it. And if we take this point here 130,000 years ago, it's the first big kind of warming peak in the past, you can see that temperatures rise first, that CO2 comes up second. You can see that CO2 stays level for 15,000 years while temperatures fall. There just isn't a strong connection in these graphs. In fact, the only real connection, which is explained in here, is that temperature controls CO2. And it's obvious that temperature controls CO2, heats the oceans, releases the CO2, and then as the world cools, because of other reasons, CO2 gets absorbed again. Maybe there's a small amplification in there, but it hasn't been shown mathematically, it hasn't been published in peer-reviewed research. You know, I looked at this and thought, wow, this doesn't disprove the whole great global warming thing on its own. There's lots of other evidence we use to do that. But for us...
Right.
I know this.
I just fine-tune your stance a little bit.
Yep, sure.
So
And
you just need to give me space this way. So,
which way?
so instead of putting your shoulder like that,
Yeah, I'm blocking it.
I can be shoulder up.
Sure. Yep.
Should we put one of the fighters off the hook in another room?
Could be an emergency call.
Okay,
Joe, can I just slide you both back down that way a little bit? Just sliding up. And
I'll just pick up one more point and then I'll
yeah,
finish.
sure. Just slide back a bit to do it. And maybe with those graphs, would it be best if they sort of turn them around so that Nick and Anna can both?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
The audience.
Yeah.
Correct.
All right, well, I guess you never showed us turning around.
Yeah, okay, go for it.
I wouldn't mind any repeats on that.
Contribution. Okay. For me, the big issue with this is not that it single-handedly disproves the argument, because it doesn't. There's a lot of other evidence. But what shocked me about this was that I hadn't read about it in any of the popular science magazines that I read all the time. I thought I knew stuff about this debate, and this floored me, because suddenly I realised that there was a lot that was going on behind the scenes that wasn't being reported. So I guess it was the half-truths that really got to me, that kind of undermined my belief that I understood what was going on with the climate and with the story we were being told.
So you were of the view that warming is happening and we are seeing climate change impacts.
And that carbon is a greenhouse, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and that adding more to it will warm the planet. Yes, absolutely, that's all well proven, solid science, known for years. Yes, I have no disagreement with any of that. The disagreement is with how much warming there is.
Yeah.
Is it going to be a catastrophe, or is it going to be 0.5 of a degree? And as far as we can see, the evidence, the empirical evidence, and there's lots of it, all seems to point to it being around about half a degree to maybe 1 degree with CO2 doubling, which is not the catastrophic projections that are coming out from the climate models.
So you've said that with at the moment we're 40% more CO2 than pre-industrial revolution.
Yes,
40%,
yes, well,
roughly.
yes,
So
so
you said
100 ppm.
That if we go up 10% more, you said that we will see a 1.2 degree warming.
No, if it doubles from pre-industrial levels, so it's 280 to 560 ppm.
Then
At the moment we're at 390, we're a long way off that doubling and going up at about 2 ppm a year.
So, but you have said that carbon could lead to warming at 1.2 degrees Celsius.
If it does.
If CO2 doubles
Yeah,
from
that's right.
pre-industrial times, 1.2 is the maximum that there's any evidence to support. That would be the direct effects of CO2, according to the physics that we know of that is well proven, that CO2 absorbs and re-emits.
Yeah.
Infrared.
But having admitted that carbon does lead to warming
Sure.
and up to, as in your opinion, 1.2 degrees, I'm wondering why you're still putting out the handbook that says that the impact of carbon is unmeasurable? Because obviously that, where you said here.
Because so far we've had 0.7 of a degree due to all kinds of factors in the last century, and to argue that the effects we've had so far are unmeasurable, it's very difficult to unpick all the factors that are going on driving the climate and separate it out and say how much of this is caused by CO2 and how much isn't.
Right.
I'm saying at most it's possible it could be 1.2. The evidence we're getting from the satellites and from the weather balloon measurements, for over 40 years of weather balloon measurements, show that we're looking more at about half that, and that's for a doubling. So that'll be whenever the planet reaches 560, if it gets there.
I've looked through your blog though, and
Just hang on a second, and I might actually, we'll come back to your questions, we'll reposition a little bit. David, you were going to take us through very quickly that summary of...
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Anna.
Sorry.
Wait a second,
Just a
wait a
second.
second.
Thank you.
Talk Anna. Anna, we agree that carbon dioxide causes global warming. Every molecule of carbon dioxide that we emit causes some global warming. It's not a question of if it causes warming or not, it's a question of how much. So we get down to calculations. Right? And the calculations that tell you that how much warming is caused by the direct effect of CO2 in the atmosphere are well known. That's physics that's been done a century ago.
yeah, carbon
Okay.
dioxide.
Exactly.
Carbon
Now,
dioxide.
the problem is, in the climate models, only 1/3 of the warming is due to that direct effect of CO2. The other 2/3 is due to positive feedbacks. And that's the bit we're arguing about. Now,
So we're just arguing, we all agree that climate change is happening, it's due to
Yes.
carbon pollution, but we're
No.
just saying about how much.
no, I agree that climate change is occurring, but I don't think it's due to carbon
Or
dioxide
some
emissions.
small immeasurable amount.
Some very small amount is,
due to
but the
CO2,
majority is not.
but-
Potentially 1.2 degrees, but also.
If carbon doubles-
If CO2 doubles, if it gets to 560, the planet's not even close to 560. So we're talking about a theoretical future point in time with the 1.2 degrees, which came from James Hansen et al. 1984. We have no real beef with that calculation. It's a question of these feedbacks amplifying that 1.2 to 3.5, or in the case of Garneau, I think he's talking 5.9 or 5.7 degrees or something. You know, these are enormous leaps, and it would be quite a different picture for the planet if we're talking about 3 degrees or 5 degrees, as opposed to half a degree, which is closer to what we say the empirical evidence is showing us.
So you don't believe in positive feedbacks?
We don't think the positive feedbacks are supported by any evidence. The evidence all supports negative feedbacks, which would fit with almost every other natural system that applies on the planet. Most natural, long-term, long-standing situations have negative feedback, which is what makes them inherently fairly
So
stable.
counterbalancing effect.
That's right.
Yeah.
Any perturbation is matched by a dampening effect. Anna, do you know of any evidence that carbon dioxide is the main cause of global warming? Any evidence at all?
Yes.
What?
So we've got models, we've got.
Well, models isn't an evidence. Models are just computations. They're logically equivalent to someone punching a lot of calculations. I'm a model, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you've done a lot of data entry, so there is.
It's not data entry, Anna, it's calculations.
Wasn't that what models are?
Data entry is a
No.
great way to put down something.
No, well, a model is something that tries to, in the computer, replicate or mimic, is isomorphic in some way to what's happening out there in the real world.
Yeah.
So to simulate the entire climate and
Your
condense it
point.
down to theoretical calculations, it's a page, it's lots of pages of calculations, effectively,
Yeah.
that's what a model is. So it's someone saying, I reckon if we assume this and we estimate that, and we think this is probably the case and we work within these limits which we reckon are right, and we add this factor and this factor and this factor, and then we calculate it or we get an answer.
Yeah.
It's a theoretical calculation, it's not observational evidence.
Mm.
We're arguing that we need to get back to the real basics of science, and true science is based on observations.
Yeah.
28 million weather balloons have been released looking for things that the models have predicted and have found the models are wrong. They've proven that the models are based on flawed assumptions. So,
But in answer to your question,
Sorry,
Yes, I'm
sorry,
looking for
can we-
any evidence at all. We're not looking for evidence of warming, we're looking for evidence that carbon did it.
Sorry, just because we're going to run out of time,
yeah.
and I'd love to actually cover off the points that we discussed before, so that
I'm
we've
trying to
got
do
those
that.
down. Sure. So, Anna,
sorry, I'll
let's
stop
just
interrupting.
yeah. Nick, I'm just wondering. I know that Helen's probably just told you the opposite, but I don't have a shot on Nick's face at all. So I'm just wondering if the angle's around a bit. Is that
make a
gonna
much
work
better
for you?
shadow?
Yeah.
Right, a bit of space, yeah, that's okay with
Yeah.
that position
So
there.
mine's new.
Can you
Yeah, I'll wait
angle
for
yourself?
Which
Where's
way?
David?
Yeah,
You first,
sure.
yeah.
Is that right? From
Oh,
your
yeah,
point
of
of
course
view?
I'm
Yeah.
familiar with it.
Yeah.
I've completely
Um,
debunked everything in
Sorry?
there. I can give you a copy of it if you
I
like.
read it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Well,
just
his
this
debunker
appealing
was
to the
mine.
debate. And
We're
Yeah,
debating to mine step.
can I push him down that way and push these guys along a little bit?
Yeah, they go
Yeah.
back and forth.
It is.
Yeah.
He took 2
Can I push
years
you
to
down,
find
down
professors and I
that? Sorry
took
guys,
that.
just hang on a second. Can I just
Yeah.
push you up that way just a little again? We just have to make sure we don't slide down because
Okay.
I'll lose
You're
Nick.
getting
Is that
too
it?
close.
Yeah, you're good.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah, what's cue date?
now, David, you're going to run through.
So Anna,
Sorry, and okay, go for it.
there is no empirical evidence that carbon dioxide is the main cause of global warming. There's evidence that there is evidence of climate change, there's evidence of warming. That's not evidence that carbon dioxide did it. Okay.
Although you accept that carbon dioxide does cause some warming.
Theoretically, we know it must cause some warming, Nick.
Yep.
Yeah. The only reason, and climate scientists will agree with me, the reason that climate scientists blame carbon dioxide is because of their models. What they've done is embody all the physics and all their understanding of the climate science in the models to simulate what's going on in the climate. Okay? So the reason we believe that carbon dioxide might be a danger to the planet and our emissions is because of the models. But the models are fundamentally flawed. We know that because we've now, over the last 15 years, collected several data sets in several different areas that contradict the models entirely. I'd like to quickly present you with evidence of 4 of those contradictions. The first one is the models have built up a track record. They've been predicting temperature for a while, and they've got a track record that goes back to 1988, when James Hansen, the father of global warming, introduced to the US Congress the whole idea. And here's a copy of his original peer-reviewed journal paper, where he's outlined 3 scenarios of how temperature increases over the years. And starting in 1988, he saw scenario A, where the world kept emitting carbon dioxide at roughly the same level as it was then, which is in fact the path we followed. But he also included scenario C here, which is what he thought the climate models would say if the world cut back on carbon emissions savagely starting in 1988, such that by the year 2000, the carbon level, the atmospheric carbon level, had stopped increasing at all. Now, here is what the satellites say the temperature of the world actually did. And you'll notice that the actual temperatures are well below what Hansen thought would happen if we kept emitting carbon, and they're even below what the model said if we cut back on carbon. So I think that's pretty strong proof that A, the climate models exaggerate a lot, and B, they haven't got a clue about the effect of carbon dioxide on the world's temperature.
But David, were these models that were used in 1988?
Yeah, they're essentially the same. The science was set.
Well, that, I was going to, it sort of begs the
It's
question,
it's
are
very
the
much the
models
same.
now so much?
Yeah, the models give the same
better or
answers
less
today. They're just beefier, but they're
Yeah.
essentially the same.
They have the same assumptions about things like water
Yeah.
vapour. For example, when we talk about the 3.5 degree warming, that's the amount due to at 1.2 degrees above where it was at.
Yeah.
If it doubles, so if it doubles between
Yeah.
2000 and 2100, 1.2 degrees is due to the direct effects of carbon and the physics that's well known. This 2/3 is due to feedbacks, and the biggest feedback is water vapour, and that was the case back in 1990 or
Yeah.
1988. If the models are still running on the assumption that, and it makes sense, that the world will warm, it'll release more water, more humidity into the atmosphere. Humidity is the strongest greenhouse gas. It keeps, it traps warming, at night time. So it makes sense. It was a fair guess to say more humidity will increase the warming even further. But the catch is that humidity rising to the top of the blanket of wet air around the planet? Does it get up to that 10-kilometre height, or does it turn into clouds at 1 or 2 kilometres and rain out on us? Clouds are cooling down that low, net cooling, they reflect a lot of light back to space. So the real debate here, the $2 trillion guess, is whether humidity rises up and turns into clouds and rains out, or whether it goes up to 10 kilometres and sticks around and acts to thicken the blanket and make the planet even warmer still. And that's where the 28 million radio songs, the weather balloons that have been recording since 1959, are really important. They show no increase in humidity, in fact the decrease in humidity, up at that important layer, the 10-kilometre layer, where it should be increasing. And they also show no temperature increase up there, which is what all of the models which suggest big rises in temperature, they all depend on getting that result. So this is a key assumption. And
What does the IPC say in response to that?
Well,
You just-
I can show you.
what are they?
Let's go on, I'll
you
show
should
you.
show the
Well,
graphs,
we will.
you show this, yeah.
And a second bit of evidence shows the climate models are fundamentally flawed. Most of the heat in the climate is contained in the oceans, a relatively small amount in the air, right? The models say that the heat in the ocean should be increasing at a pretty steady rate. However, we've only measured ocean heat properly since 2003 when the Argo system went in. The Argo system has 3,000 buoys around the world. They dive down, duck dive down at 2,000 metres. They come up very slowly, measure the temperature. When they hit the surface, they radio the results by satellite back to HQ.
Was Argo the data that you said was not publicly available, but that actually was?
When I said that, the data was not publicly available,
And
and now has been released.
Only
And I drew this graph from the stuff they've released. This is the Argo data since it came into inception in 2003. It's roughly flat. The climate model shows
Now, was this sea surface temperature, or
well, it's actually ocean
what is
heat
that
content.
measured?
It's actually ocean heat content, or equivalently ocean temperature.
The amount of heat
For
stored,
the first,
what, 700
first 700
metres?
metres.
Right.
And that's roughly the whole crush depth of a military submarine.
And
So it's pretty deep.
70% of the planet is covered with water, so this is a
Yeah,
large
exactly.
slab of the planet's heat that we're talking about. And if the planet was warming, this is where we'd expect to see the heat being stored. And the evidence is just not there. And back in October last year, I mean, wasn't Roger Pielke asking for the data? And
He
he was
was.
getting letters saying, no, I'm sorry, you know.
Major US climate scientists, they just said, no, can't have the data.
So you're saying the ocean is not warming?
No,
The
the
data
Argo
says-
system says that the ocean is not warming.
3,000 buoys radioing back information say that the ocean isn't warming. Where is this missing heat?
That's 2003, middle of 2003 when the Argo system came on until today.
And is that, what's this measure?
Oh, these are in
Ocean
joules.
heat
10 to the
content
20
joules, right.
joules.
Yeah.
Big scary numbers with lots
You
of
can convert it
zeros.
to temperature if you like,
Right.
it's possible.
Yeah.
The
But
third-
it's heat content.
Sorry, slide back down again, guys, and get on the, and then come. Can you come down a little, Joe?
Sorry,
Yep, that's all right. Yep. Okay, and third.
I just want
The
to get
third
closer.
area, Anna, where the climate models are fundamentally flawed is in their treatment of the warming pattern in the atmosphere. As the planet warms, the atmosphere warms too, and the pattern of warming in the atmosphere gives you some clues about the cause of the warming. Now, all the climate change models, all of them, all say that there's a big increase of heat about 10 kilometres up over the tropics. This is the so-called hotspot.
This is the point. We're 10 kilometres up.
So in these two diagrams here, this is what the climate models say should be happening. This is 75 degrees north, the equator, and 75 degrees south. This is high above the equator. That's about 10 or 12 kilometres there. And this is the pattern we're expecting. Now, as it happens, people have been sending up millions of radio sondes, weather balloons, since the 1960s, measuring the atmospheric warming pattern. And this is what they measure. That's reality.
And what year is this taken from?
This is this one.
2006. This comes from the program 2006.
This is
This is
published. This is published in 2006. It's the warming pattern from 1979 through 1999, which is a period of warming, global warming.
The decadal
Right, that's 20
trends.
years.
Yeah, 20 years. This is over a similar period. Now, all the climate models all have this hotspot. It's missing. Now, the significance of this, Anna, is absolutely crucial. You see, the whole climate model setup was based on a guess about how moist air behaves. It was made in 1980. Right? The guess was that as the planet heats due to any cause, there's more evaporation, and the water vapor blanket thickens. Right? There's two greenhouse blankets on our planet that we're worth considering. There's a carbon dioxide blanket, that's the small one, and there's a much bigger water vapor blanket that does most of the work. And the way the climate models work is they say, all right, if you increase the warming due to the CO2 blanket getting a bit thicker, that'll cause the water vapor blanket to get thicker as well. And it'll amplify it. And they say it amplifies it by about a factor of 3. So you get a little bit of temperature due to the direct increase of heat due to the CO2, and then that amplifies it by a factor of 3 due to the water vapor blanket. This shows that the water vapor blanket,
So what are you saying? Is that for that to be true, there has to be a hotspot?
there has to be a hotspot. No hotspot, no water vapor blanket thickening, no amplification by a factor of 3. Our CO2 is not a cause for alarm.
That's that major positive
It's really
feedback
that
just
simple.
disappears when you don't have any sign of the extra humidity and warming that they expect. That's a major assumption, the major positive feedback assumption. It's
How do
just
we
wrong.
actually know whether
It's
there's a
just
hotspot or not? How is that measured?
There is no hotspot. This
No, no,
is
but
every
how would
model
you know
has a
if there was
hotspot.
one?
The
Because
weather
we send up
balloons.
radio sondes. They have
Yeah,
a
what
radio
measures the
sonde. A
hotspot?
radio sonde or a weather balloon
Yeah.
is a package at the end of a hot air balloon, helium balloon,
Yeah.
and this package has a thermometer in it and a radio transmitter. And they release them up in the air.
What, but it's a measure of This is humidity. Is this humidity?
No, it's just
or
temperature.
It's actually temperature.
It's a temperature change.
Humidity
Okay.
is quite hard to measure up there because it is
Yeah.
very dry air
Right.
on the edge of that water blanket
So
layer.
it's simply a measure of the temperature.
That's right. As you go up, you need a radio sensor. You can't just with satellites because they can't distinguish the temperature at different heights. But the radio sons can because they ascend through there slowly, and at each height, they're radioing back what the temperature was. So we've got a very clear idea of what the change in the atmospheric warming pattern was over the last 3 or 4 decades. And all the climate models say this, and reality says that. And that provides at least 2/3 of the warming in the climate change models. So the climate change models
And
are
are there any
falsified.
possible explanations to that? And how would you
No,
deal
it's
with
rather
those
a black
explanations?
spot. This came out about 1995 or so. We accumulated enough data to be able to pretty sure this picture. They hid the results till 2006, and they finally published them in a bunch of diagrams just hidden away in the back of the report in
CCS,
2006.
Taylor, 2006.
Yeah, US climate change science programs.
And
Okay, we
what-
might need to
Sorry, Anna.
move on to the next point. We'll come back to these, Anna.
All right.
Yeah, well, I have a lot I want to say on this.
Um,
but
I
I
know
that
it's
they want to
difficult,
get
it
through-
is,
Yeah.
it's difficult.
Yeah.
All right.
I want
Okay.
to get through all the points first, I guess.
Now, the fourth bit of evidence we'd like to show you is what happens when the surface of the Earth heats up. You might imagine as the surface of the Earth heats up, it gives off more radiation out into space, outgoing radiation space, as measured by satellite. And that is in fact what happens, that's reality. The climate models, however, all show that as the surface of the Earth heats up, less heat is radiated to
That's
space
the positive.
because in the models, they aggressively trap heat too much. It's that positive feedback again here.
Yeah.
Right, so they're trapping heat with that water vapor blanket,
The
and the
assumption-
heat isn't escaping
the
into
assumption
space.
underneath
That's the model.
Yeah.
And Professor Lindsay at MIT is a very eminent, very eminent climate scientist, has pointed out in 2010 that the reality, as measured by the Irby satellite, has a slope this way. But all the climate models,
Sorry,
which are all
that's the
these,
slope of...
this is reality. This is the Irby satellite.
Yep.
This is how the temperature, the amount of radiation, outgoing radiation increases as the temperature of the planet, the temperature of the surface increases. But all the climate models show the outgoing radiation decreasing as the surface temperature goes down. Now, any one of those 4 points, the failure of the climate models to predict air temperature, water temperature, the hot spot, and the outgoing radiation, any one of them is enough independently to invalidate the climate models. And the climate models are the only reason we have for believing in the CO2 scare. There is no empirical evidence to show that CO2 is the major cause of the recent global warming. It's only because of the climate models that we believe that. And the climate models are fundamentally flawed.
And what about, David, you're going to show us the photographs as well.
I was.
Does Joe want to talk about those?
I'll talk about this.
Okay, sorry.
So Anna, this evidence that
You can leave them there for a minute. Nick, you need to cheat that away from you just a fraction.
But Helen's wanting to go the other way.
Oh, you gotta go, Helen?
Am I right here, Helen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anna, this evidence that the climate models are fundamentally flawed and that the guess about hot air made in 1980 was wrong first started appearing in the mid-90s. And the climate models and the climate scientists could have abandoned their theory and said, oh, sorry, we're wrong. But by then, you already had a lot of political momentum built up. A lot of people on very good money, building careers, bureaucratic careers and so on, and they let it go.
The RPPC was already
Yeah, the
in
RPCC.
motion. Kyoto came in
Yeah.
1997. A lot of money was starting to move into the field,
Banks
banking on the
yeah.
fact that we would get a carbon trading scheme of sorts. There were a lot of people, bureaucrats, people with careers that depended on it. I mean, you can't blame them for trying to find all the reasons why their story, their institution, their thing was right.
So you're saying that thousands of climate scientists around the world are in a giant conspiracy to cover
No,
it
we're
up?
not saying
People
that.
love to throw the
It's not a
conspiracy theories
conspiracy
in.
at all. It's a case of
systematic
groupthink.
problem.
It's a confluence of interests. At best, it's a massive case of confirmation bias. There's only a few climate scientists who are aware of the details of this and how the models actually work, and everyone else is relying on them.
Only 62 scientists reviewed Chapter 9 in the last IPCC report. So we're talking about 3 dozen scientists. And most of those had written articles in it, were reviewing their own work or were some way involved in it. The thousands of scientists that the IPCC referred to, many of those study things like the effects of climate change on lemurs in Madagascar. They've never looked at the climate models. They're studying the effects of warming, glaciers, sea level rise, things like that. Those things are going to happen no matter what causes the warming. So most of those thousands of scientists are not involved in the details of estimating climate sensitivity.
But even now, every year, there's 1,000 to 2,000 papers published on climate change.
Because
And they
people
don't
have
disagree
put
with
in,
that,
sure, people have
Sure
put
they
in
do.
$79 billion, in fact the number's probably much higher than that now, to paying scientists to find a crisis. So those scientists have done what they're paid to do. They've looked at every possible angle and every possible cause to put out a paper on the question they've been asked to study. No one's been asked to study the other side. No one's been paid to audit the IPCC, to find holes in the theory. There are no grants for skeptics to come out and say, hey, we'd like to look at these climate models and we'd like to produce a climate model based on, say, solar and magnetic factors. So it's totally monopolistic science.
I think
And
it's
science
the sun
shouldn't
that
work
causes
like
climate
that.
change.
We think that there's a lot of other factors that need to be considered.
Well, I believe that climate scientists have considered the sun, they've
The
considered the
IPCC
changes.
does not include any solar magnetic effects in any of its models. This enormous impact, and the results have just come out of CERN recently, support it. The empirical evidence suggests that there's a connection between sunspots and the climate. But we're not saying, we don't know what causes climate change, we're simply saying there's a lot of other factors, and the models ignore them all and then say, yes, well, we looked at everything and we couldn't explain the warming except for CO2 in our models. It's an argument from ignorance. It's
If
a
you're
logical
going to
fallacy.
say that the majority of the scientific establishment is wrong, that NASA's wrong,
No,
that
we're
every
not. Well, no,
every
we're
scientist
We're not
is
saying
wrong,
that at
is
all.
that support an
Thousands.
alternative theory?
No, thousands of scientists support the skeptics and 900 peer-reviewed papers support skeptical arguments. It's a difference between independent scientists and establishment or government-paid scientists. We can name Nobel Prize winners in physics who agree with us. Ivor Giaever resigned today. He's a Nobel Prize winning physics in tunnelling physics. And he resigned today from the American Physical Society because he said it is ridiculous to say the evidence on global warming is incontrovertible. So here we have experts, top-level, outranking scientists. We never argue that we're right because we have Nobel Prize winners on our side, because that would be argument from authority. We argue we're right because of the evidence.
So where is this warming going? I mean, there's
Anna,
things that they're
Anna,
measuring.
we're presenting you with evidence, and you're coming back with authority. You're saying, how can those scientists be wrong? You're not coming back with counter-evidence, you're arguing for authority. That puts us structurally in the same position as Galileo and the Pope. The Pope had all the political authority and was arguing from authority because he was interpreted religious stuff. So it was religious dogma, and he was the guy who was interpreting it. Galileo had evidence on his side, and that was the start of the Enlightenment. Right? When science and evidence triumphed over political authority. Now, we're having a discussion here. I'm presenting you with evidence, and you're presenting me with authority.
Well, I'm not a scientist, but I think that I'm smart enough to listen to the majority
Sure.
of
But
scientists.
what
and
you're essentially saying is not so much that scientists are wrong, but there's lots of these scientists who are still relying on the models.
Exactly. And
yeah,
look what they're
that's the
doing.
point.
This is
Yeah.
what I wanted to bring you to.
Yes.
This is what I wanted to bring you to. Now, remember I showed you the hotspot there? Which just disproves the climate models, shows they're wrong. Well, they released the data in 2006 finally, the experimental data, and in 2008 a guy called Youre came up with this. He reanalysed the data using not the temperature thermometers in there, but using the wind shear meters. And he had a theory about wind shear, he reanalysed it and he came up with this.
So what did he wind shear?
So he measured using the wind and a theory about wind shear, he tried to get a different picture of what the temperatures up there were.
Okay.
And he analysed it and he came up with this. And all the alarmist scientists were the ways they knew understood how models work and so on, were very relieved that the hotspot had been found. And this was trumpeted, including by John Cook's Skeptical Science site, as finding the hotspot. Now, there's just a little problem here. It's not a very
You're
technical
talking about
problem.
the scale.
I'm talking about the scale. The colour here for no change at all is red. Is red. So if there were no change in the atmospheric warming pattern at all, it would be red. Now, the question for you, Anna, is what purpose could there possibly be for using such an unorthodox scale except to deceive?
So you think that scientists are trying to deceive people?
You're answering a question with a question.
No,
I mean, I think it's reasonable.
Youre
to
was
ask
sort
them
of-
that.
Do you think it's reasonable for scientists to change the scale of graphs in order to show that it matches the data? It takes no change at all, zero change, to produce an orange-red colour on this graph. The climate could stay exactly the same, which it likely did, and they, in this respect, and they managed to show it as if it matches the graph here.
What's
The
Mr.
data
What's
that
Mr.
you're
Sherwood said?
using, it's-
David, sorry. I'm just concerned about time,
Yeah.
and I know that there's a limited amount that we can put in the program, so I think the points that we covered before, the strongest ones, you probably need to.
Already do this one.
I think so, yeah. I think so, because I need to give Anna a chance to ask you some
Alright, sorry,
questions.
I'll do this one with all you now.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, just hold on a second. Do you need a 30 seconds to...
Yeah, I'm getting the 30 seconds.
Do 30 seconds, yeah.
I'm a bit worried about shadow then.
Shadows?
I don't know what it
Yeah,
was.
just when he's coming in,
Yeah,
is it?
there's a shadow on these, which is
Yeah.
Is that me?
as well.
Like that,
Yeah,
like-
you see it,
Is
yeah.
that like this?
No, I think it's Anna between that line
Yes,
and
can you see your
these.
shadow?
Yeah.
And sometimes when David leans forward, your shadow, so you just need left for it.
Okay.
You see
Yeah.
it.
Sure.
Would it be a problem if we track that light over just a fraction?
Yeah,
That'd be good
that's
for me. Yeah,
Let's
and
see
then we'll
what
come in and
shadows
get
are.
some... We need to go over all the pictures again, which is why this is going to take a little bit more time, so I want to make sure we get a chance to get close-ups of your hand
Alright.
on that, and then we can go, so...
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, we can go to, I mean, later, we're just going to pick the kids up and put it
Let's
in
get
the back.
content going.
Yeah.
I've got a few of those already anyway.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Second.
okay. Sorry, I'm going to spin the kilometres on you now as well.
Hold on a second. Nick, just...
And it's hard being outnumbered. Oh, we
We
understand
used to
we're
do that.
sympathetic.
Okay,
so-
let's
We
go.
usually
Okay, rolling. Okay, and go for it.
So we reckon the climate scientists have got a failed model in their hands, and they're cheating and concealing the failure of their model. One of the ways they conceal the failure is to mismeasure the temperature. For instance, here's an official thermometer that's used to measure global warming. The thermometer's in there, and the thermometer's near an air conditioning outlet, which air conditioners emit hot air, near a refrigeration outlet, that's emit hot air, near decomposing sewage, which was also hot, over concrete and behind a windbreak. So I put it to you that that is not measuring global temperature at all. It's not even measuring the area of the locality, the area around. It's just measuring that locality, and it's artificially warming.
And it certainly isn't measuring the way things were 100 years ago. And we're looking for 0.7 of a degree over a century with thermometers like this. There were no air conditioning ducts in 1890 or 1910. The situation has changed around these thermometers, and they might be in the same spot, but urban life has closed in around them. And these standards are not good. I mean, what kind of scientist would look at that thermometer and say, yes, we can accurately measure the heat, the change in climate to 0.1 of a degree with thermometers like this?
These thermometers are very sensitive. Any little heating nudge matters. There's a car park here with hot engines cooling down, heating that one. There's another air conditioner there. There's asphalt to keep it warm at night. Here's one in northern Norway. There's the airport terminal, and there's a runway. The thermometer's here. Now, jet aircraft go there and give them the occasional blast of jet air. There's de-icing machines that go by. It gets the hot tarmac to keep it a little bit warmer at night. If they were serious about measuring the temperature in this locality, they wouldn't put the thermometer there. They'd put it over there or over here out in the snow.
They're not.
Here's another example. Half the world's thermometers, official thermometers for measuring global warming, are at airports. This one's at Rome Airport. So you've got aircraft taxiing in here. They occasionally hit this thermometer here with blasts of jet air. There's a bunch of cars and trucks over here. This isn't measuring global warming, it's measuring local warming, a very local warming. It's measuring the increase in air traffic. Here's another example. Now these thermometers are supposed to be in a clearing, at least, that's over natural vegetation. I put it to you, this is not natural vegetation in Florida. There's a bunch of air conditioners and sewage plants.
NOAA's own standards say that there should be 30 metres or more from an artificial heating source.
And a survey by a bunch of US volunteers went out and photographed these things, and they found that 89% of these US thermometers that are used in the global system violate the official siting requirements. They be more than 100 feet or 30 metres from an artificial heating source. Here's a classic. This is in Baltimore. This one's on the top of a roof, in the middle of a huge city. So you've got urban heat from cars and buildings all over the place. But the thermometer's here. Sorry. And then they put it near the air conditioners. At least they could have put it on the other side of the building. These people aren't even trying. Or are they?
Who places it? Is it the US Weather Bureau?
No.
Well, no, see, yeah, this is it. And a lot of these stations are maintained by volunteers. So we're not suggesting that there's been a deliberate effort here to make the data dodgy. The data has got dodgy, and that's been an accident. But scientists should be up in arms that this is where the data's
But they
coming
choose
from.
to use the dodgy data.
That's
Let
it,
me
they
explain.
haven't excluded the data from their records. This kind of data, a real scientist would look at it and say, wow, oh my goodness, well we can't rely on that thermometer, we'll get it out of the records. We'll just erase that and go back to the thermometers we have, which are good ones. And that would be the honest thing to do
Well,
in a
there's the Bureau
situation
of
like
Meteorology
this.
does that in Australia.
It may
This
be-
one's in Australia. This is the Sydney Observatory, that's the Western Distributed there, that's where the thermometer is.
So this is not included in the temperature records.
Sure.
It's not. I mean, you've been told this before. Why don't we call the Bureau of Meteorology now if you want to go over it again? But I mean,
What
let's
are you
do it.
saying,
Let's
that
call
that
them.
thermometer measures from
so
that
in
is not
Australia,
used?
the Bureau of Meteorology, and they have told David this earlier, but
I've never been told anything by the Bureau of Meteorology.
okay, well, it's my understanding that this had been pointed out to you by people. That
Sorry,
the
it's not in the
Australian-
real world.
That the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, they have these sites. The one in Sydney is actually at Botany. They don't use the one in the city.
Well, they used to use that one.
So they
Oh,
don't-
we'll let that one stand for a while.
But it's not like climate scientists aren't aware of this. You're acting like it's
Yes,
some-
but they're using it nonetheless.
Well, actually,
And
the
here's the
Bureau of
result.
Meteorology doesn't use
Here's
it.
the result. The Goddard Institute of Space Studies, James Hansen's outfit at NASA, produces this as the world temperature record. And they don't use any satellites for here. It's all from land and sea thermometers. All right? And the general impression, obviously, there is an increasing trend. And the warmest year could be 2010, 2006, maybe 2002. And 1998 isn't anything in particular. Okay, we've got the graph 1979 to current time. So we've got an increased warming trend. And that's a very politically convenient thing. But we also have satellites measuring the globe. Satellites go around 24/7. They measure almost the entire planet without bias. And they show quite a different picture. They show that 1998 was the warmest year. They show a warming trend till about 2001, and then it flattens off somewhat. So all that mucking around with corrupt thermometers makes a difference.
All those headlines that came out last year that 2010 was the warmest year ever relied on the one record from GIS, not the three other global data sets which combine the satellites or other data.
So you're talking about this one.
It's cherry picking in a sense to say 2010 was the warmest year without saying that 3 out of the 4 major global data sets don't say that.
But if you don't trust NASA's data, I assume you don't use it.
This does come from a NASA satellite. We trust this one because it's satellite data and hasn't been fudged around like this.
So you trust some
From
of
the
NASA's
NASA.
data, but not
The
the
NASA.
rest.
That's right. The ones that come from
Well, you just
GPS
basically
and
say-
these thermometers here that are so badly located and violate official timing requirements, no, we don't trust that. We
55
instead trust the stuff that comes off the NASA Aqua satellite, which is shown here in the University of Alabama's record, temperature record.
I mean, how stupid do you think climate scientists are to not... They do account for this.
Well, they have a failed
How
theory
can
on
you
their
say
hands.
that?
Well, they try to
And they're
build.
concealing.
55% of all of the temperature data they use in the global records comes from their airports. And we know that airports didn't exist in 1910. We know there wasn't 2 square kilometres of thick black tarmac absorbing heat and reflecting it back next to half the world's thermometers in 1910. And yet we're told the world has warmed, if the evidence is incontrovertible, remember the debate is settled. And no one's allowed to ask any questions. You don't need a PhD in physics to look at thermometers which are at airports or near tarmac. And the Australian thermometers have never been independently audited. The ones in the US were independently audited by about 700 volunteers. How come a $4 billion agency can't go out and audit its own thermometers to make sure they're in the right spot? I mean, NOAA has a $4 billion budget, and it took 700 volunteers to go out and take photos of 1,000 stations in the US. And only after those were made public did NOAA say, well, all right, we'll stop counting the data from some of these stations, but we'll leave it in the past record. In some cases, they've done that. The scientists should have been up in arms. They should have said, wow, I had no idea the data was this unreliable. We will completely go through the process. Thanks for pointing out the mistakes. Thanks for showing us some unreliable data. We'll make sure we get the best, most rigorous data we can use.
2 things. One, they were aware of it. It was climate scientists that raised this as, oh, yes, it's called the urban heat island effect. Yes, they're aware
No,
of it.
the
Yes,
urban
they
heat
can.
island effect is different. This is called micro-siting problems with stations. It's not about the urban heat island effect. It's about the fact that these are closer than 30 metres to artificial heat sources. It's NOAA's own standards. In 89% of the cases that the volunteers photographed, 89% were too close by NOAA's standards to artificial heat and cooling sources. That's pretty major failure of a bureaucracy. 89% failed their own standards and they didn't know that and they hadn't done
Do they try to
micro-siting
adjust the
survey themselves.
land-based temperature record to take account of the location?
Sometimes
Yeah,
they do.
they do.
But consider this, Nick.
Yeah.
If they're playing with the numbers on their computers, why bother with the thermometers? You're going to play with them on the computer anyway. And the bottom line is, their temperature record is different from the satellites. Satellites are unbiased, go around 24/7, they come up with a very different picture.
But I mean,
And how-
here's all of the, here's 3 data sets, and they're all showing a clear upward trend.
Well, no, see, this is the
Sure, look at the
satellite
timescale.
one shows it coming back.
We just showed you a graph of that much. Notice how this one keeps going up and the other one's levelling off a bit?
Yeah,
That's what we're talking
this
about.
measures partly in the ocean and around the Arctic where a lot of the warming is concentrated. So you can't just ignore
Actually,
ocean.
they're measuring the Arctic where there are no land thermometers. And they extrapolate into it. They're using their computers, not thermometers, to get the Arctic temperatures.
They use
So that's a different
1,200
argument.
kilometre smoothing, where they take a thermometer and they extrapolate for 1,200 kilometres around it to estimate what the temperature would be. Since 1990, when all the money poured into climate science and we got concerned about this, something like 75% of all of the stations have been excluded from the database. Instead of getting more data put into this, instead of having 6,000 data points, which is what they had in the 80s, they've dropped it down to 1,500 or less. Where's all that data gone? Why do we now estimate 1,200 kilometres from thermometer to thermometer instead of using all the data from everywhere we can? It'd be alright if they'd removed all of the unreliable thermometers, but clearly that's not the
So you're saying
case.
this green line from NASA is wrong?
Yeah,
We're
that's the
saying-
yes line.
you're talking
This
about
green line from
0.1 of a
NASA
degree.
comes from this thermometer in part. Yes, it's wrong. And we don't trust them.
That's
They're concealing the failure of their theory.
So scientists are concealing.
I just showed you 4 bits of evidence that each on its own, independently, shows that the climate models are wrong. They disagree with reality quite violently. And those only came to light starting in 95, but mainly in the last few years. And I'm saying the climate scientists are concealing the evidence for that. They're concealing the failure of their theory, and one of the ways they do it is to mismeasure temperature. In the ClimateGate email scandal broke, we got an insight into some of the things they were doing, and some of the tricks they were pulling. And like Kevin Trenberth, he says, it's a travesty that we can't find the missing heat. The models were saying there ought to be a lot of heat build up. In reality, it was not occurring. And so the question for you is, for how much longer do the ocean temperatures and the air temperatures have to be static and not rising before you say, hang on, there's something wrong with this theory. Maybe CO2 isn't such a problem after all.
But they are rising.
But they're not. I just showed you the Argo diagrams.
I
The
know that
ocean
you think
temperature.
that scientists are concealing it, and I know that you think, I'm a bit worried when I read things on your blog about how this is linked somehow not just to a conspiracy of scientists, but also
No,
bankers.
excuse
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
Calling people conspiracy theorists is something, the name calling that people do in this debate. I have never said that, I do not say that. This is a systematic problem. We have paid scientists to argue one side of the story and we haven't paid to do the other. It's monopoly science. Monopolies don't work in business. It's like having someone go to trial and only paying for an attack team and not a defence team. It doesn't work like that. Science needs to have people asking both sides of the question, auditing from both sides, trying to disprove each other, trying to debate it. Without debate, we haven't got science, we've just got propaganda.
But I don't understand how you can say that scientists are linked to bankers in a scheme to create hyperinflation.
Because I've never said that, because I've no idea
We've
where
never
you've
said
got
that. Where'd you get that
Well,
from,
from
Anne?
your blog. You wrote this.
How do you read that kind of stuff?
You might think that inflation and climate science are only linked metaphorically, but the corruption in science is fed by the corruption in our currencies. The monetary system that allows a privileged few to print money from nothing, I don't know what that means, is the
It's
same
fractional
system that
reserve
allows...
banking, and it's an entirely different topic, and it's a big field. And yes, we think the fact that interest rates have been kept low have allowed governments to put out a lot of money into things like this, and for other people to invest in things. Let's just put some perspective on this. Climate trading last year was $144 billion turned over worldwide. Investment in renewable energy was $243 billion. None of this has anything to do with the science. The science comes back to the evidence, always, the empirical evidence.
We're presenting you with evidence.
But then why have you said if the system's swimming with easy money, people can afford to build wildly extravagant and unproductive things like wind farms? I don't understand how you link them.
Because it's easy to raise money when loans are cheap and interest rates are cheap for schemes which are hard to justify in times when you've got to spend your own money and you have to think very hard about whether you're going to spend your money on something. When money is created through fractional reserve banking in a way that makes it easy for people to take big loans, to do big takeovers, big mergers and whatnot, things like that, it's an entirely different climate. It's an economic climate which makes it easy for people to not be so careful with
You're
their
simply
money.
saying a lot of people, there's not really to say about any subject, but there's a lot of vested interests in this being right.
Which
Yeah,
tells
which-
you nothing about the science. We
yeah, which
always
doesn't go to
keep
the
coming back
science.
to the
Yeah.
evidence. It's simply an observation about the fact
Sure.
that there are a lot of
Yeah,
policies
lot of
where
vested
money
if
is
we're
not
going to
spent
talk
well.
about vested interests, the publication of this was paid for by the Heartland
And
Institute.
that's a
which
complete
gets
lie
money
and an
from
absolute myth,
No,
and
I
it
don't
is totally
don't
untrue.
care.
Is that on your blog? We've
Yeah,
received
it does.
funding
No,
from Heartland.
no, no. It says on my blog that I did this totally unfunded, absolutely with no financial support from anyone except David. Thank you, David. And I put this out online free for people to take off my website.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Who cares who pays for it? It's because you're with
And how does that change any of the graphs in it? I mean, that's an ad hominem attack.
Yeah,
It's
doesn't matter who
exactly
pays
the
for it.
kind of thing that comes from DSMOG, which is a funded site designed to smear respectable scientists and to deter scientists from speaking out, because who wants to be the target of a smear site? And no, I did this entirely off my own bat, out of a patriotic and professional duty, because I was just astonished at how this debate has become so loaded, so corrupted, and the information is not getting out there. So out of concern for that, I did this, entirely unfunded. Anything you've heard to the contrary is someone's misinterpretation.
No, I understand that.
Hartman
Right.
paid to print it. I gave them permission. They paid me nothing for it, and I asked them to print copies in Australia so that I could give them to politicians in Australia, which we did at the time.
Does their links to ExxonMobil concern you?
Not at all.
What links?
How does that change the graphs from NASA? Don't you think you're confusing the issue? I mean, we're talking about weather balloons and radiosondes and Argo buoys and data, and you're coming back to funding from Exxon. Exxon's funding, in any case, let's talk about it, was $23 million over 10 years, paid to some sceptical scientists, and not me. I'd like that check. I wish we come. But so that's $23 million, and that Greenpeace came out with that number. It was the biggest one I could find when I was searching. On the other hand, the US government has paid $79 billion into climate science and climate-related technologies and industries.
Since 1990.
Their numbers are just enormous. So for all the dollars paid to anyone in a sceptical point of view, 3,500 times as much money has gone to scientists to find more of the 1,000 papers that you referred to, a lot of which are simply repetitive, and coming up with inconclusive remarks. We've got the conclusive evidence. 28 million radiosondes, 6,000 boreholes, 3,000 Argo buoys, 30 years of satellite data. We keep coming back to the evidence, and other people keep coming back to slurs, smears and attacks.
Guys,
Speaking
I'm
of-
going to
Yeah,
sorry. This is warming up. It's really good.
Yeah.
Gravy.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Thanks, Anna. That must be tough being this evening. But
And it is hard, it is hard being outnumbered, so, yeah.
Yeah, let's take a little break. And I actually feel like
It's not about you, and it's about a big debate with a lot of money behind it, and we are such small players.
you've got to. Anna, this is James Hansen's graph from 1988. This is in a journal here, and he's got three scenarios of how he thought the temperature would be.
So bed temperature.
Yeah, these are time.
Yeah.
This is a scenario. This is a scenario A. This is you forecast the temperature with what happened if emissions stayed much the same as they are now, the rate of emissions.
As usual.
And this is in fact roughly the route that the world has followed, those carbon emissions.
yeah.
But always of interest is scenario C. And scenario C said this is what would happen if we cut back carbon emissions immediately starting in 1988, and such that by year 2000 carbon dioxide levels have stopped rising at all. And he said this was roughly the temperature that would occur. And in fact, satellites say we've underperformed both of them.
Yeah, that's a satellite temperature measure.
This red one is the satellites.
Yeah.
And what's the surface and ocean temperature show?
Then on here, this is global air temperatures, and that's satellite versus model predictions and hands.
Yeah, because you're comparing like with like, that's his.
We are, like,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
global air temperatures.
Next.
We turn to the ocean. The ocean contains most of the heat in the climate system. We only started measuring ocean temperatures or ocean heat content properly in 2003 when we used the Argo system. The Argo system consists of 3,000 buoys. They duck dive down to 2,000 metres, and they slowly come up, measuring the temperatures as they go. When they get to the surface, they radio back to a satellite and back to HQ what the temperatures were all the way up. And there are 3,000 of these roaming around the ocean, so we've got a pretty clear idea of what the temperature is in the ocean, starting in middle of 2003. And these are the entire Argo results from the middle of 2003 through to a few months ago. And they show pretty much that the temperature of the oceans has been flat, whereas the climate models are all insisting that the temperature of the ocean ought to be rising fairly quickly. So you've got a clear disagreement between models on the one hand and reality as measured by Argo on the other hand. A third area of disagreement is in the pattern of atmospheric warming. Whenever there's global warming, the atmosphere will heat, and the pattern in which it warms sometimes gives you clues about what caused the global warming. Now, all the climate models insist that the water vapour blanket increases, gets thicker. You see, the way the climate models work is they take a guess about moist air. They say, all right, the CO2 blanket increases by the heat by a certain amount, it gets a little bit thicker. But the guess about moist air says that the water vapour blanket responds by getting thicker as well. And that thickening of the water vapour shows up in this graph here. This shows, really garden this one up. But I'm going to continue showing it anyway. So we've got from 75 degrees north here through the equator, 75 degrees south. This is the height above sea level. That's about 10 or 12 kilometres. So what we're looking for is a hot spot here in the equator, above the equator. This is where it gets hotter because the water vapour blanket is pushing up. All the action happens in the tropic. What happens elsewhere is pretty much irrelevant. But we also measured from the 1960s, we measured using millions of radio sondes, we measured the actual changes. And they're shown here. In particular, there's no hot spot. These are nothing like each other. And the significance of the hot spot is that it's the water vapour thickening that causes the hot spot. So if there's no water vapour thickening, the climate models are exaggerating the temperature rises by a factor of at least 3. They're showing positive feedback where there is none.
So is this, can I talk about, do you just...
There's one more, isn't
We're
there?
just going to get it all through them.
Yeah,
We'll go
Yeah,
through
and then
it.
you're sorry.
We're just doing it for the graphics, aren't we?
No, just graphs.
All right. And this is a map of that. It shows you the outgoing radiation area in the models. Yeah, these show outgoing radiation from the Earth as the surface of the Earth heats. Now,
What's
this
Earth
one
again?
here is reality.
That's
This
it.
is the Irby satellite.
Right.
This is the satellite that recorded the outgoing radiation from the Earth during the 1990s and early 2000s. And these other 11, are all climate models. And here, the slope of the line is that way, indicating that as the surface of the Earth heats up, more radiation escapes to space, in reality. But the climate models are too aggressive in trapping heat, and they all show the opposite. They say that as the surface of the Earth heats up, less radiation gets out to space.
Sure.
And that shows that the climate models have got this fundamentally wrong. There's a fundamental flaw in the climate models, and it's to do with the water vapour blanket and heat trapping. Any more?
What was the,
Or the models?
yeah, thermometers?
All right. Very nice.
Yep.
Here's an example of how they use thermometers. That's the thermometer in there. Now, you've got an air conditioning duct here. Air conditioners emit hot air. You've got a refrigeration duct here. The refrigerators let out some hot air. You've got decomposing sewage. You've got concrete reflecting heat. And you've got a windbreak. So that thermometer is just measuring the temperature in this courtyard. It's not typical of the area around it. And this is in a warming locality. And it can't be used, or shouldn't be used, to measure global warming, but it is. And the records from this thermometer are in the global warming records as produced by Goddard Institute of Space Studies. Yes. This one's a real shocker. In here, there are 2 large air conditioning units there. There's a car park here with hot engines, and of course there's asphalt and concrete and a windbreak. This one is in northern Norway. This one's interesting. Here's the airport lounge, and here's the runway. So planes often come in here, jet planes, and there's the thermometer there. So the thermometer occasionally gets sprayed with blasts of jet air, from hot air exhaust from the engines. It also gets hit from stuff from the de-icing machines that go along here. And it gets radiation from the tarmac at night to keep it a little bit warmer than the surroundings. If they were serious about using a thermometer here to measure what the surrounding area is like, they put the thermometer out here, or over here, somewhere in the snow. So using that thermometer for the purpose of measuring global warming is wrong. No?
Sure.
Here's an example of a thermometer in an urban area. This one's in Baltimore in the United States. There's lots of urban heat coming in here from cars, buildings, everything else. This is on the top of the building. There's the thermometer there. And they've placed it very close to an air conditioning unit. I mean, if you're at all serious, even if you had to do it in this location, put it on the other side of the building, surely. Not near the air conditioning units, and the air conditioning units are releasing hot air.
And what about the one about the, I think enough of those, the,
The Sherwood one, the colouring entry.
correct, yeah, correct.
The point of view?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. This is an example produced by Steve Sherwood. He's at New South Wales University and was at Yale. Steve Sherwood published this in the Journal of Climate in 2008. And he used the same data that I showed you earlier for the hotspot. Let's put it back together, this one again. All right. Let's have that there, and I'll next one. Okay, ready? This is a graph from Steve Sherwood, who's at Yale and now at New South Wales University. He published this in the Journal of Climate in 2008. And he took this data, and instead of just using the thermometers in the radio science, he used the wind meters instead. And he had a theory about wind shear, and he applied this in his computers. And he came up with a different picture of what he thought the temperatures were. Temperature warming pattern in the atmosphere in the last 30 years. Now, without arguing about the merits of using wind meters to measure the temperature, there's a problem with this graph, and that is that the scale shows 0, there's no change. If there was no change at all in the atmosphere's temperature, Sherwood's graph would be all red. Now I ask you, is there any reason you'd choose a shade like this other than to deceive people? Because every other graph that ever shows temperature always shows red as warming and blue as cold. But here, he's given the misleading impression that there's a hotspot. And indeed, the alarmists used this for a couple of years to quell questions about whether the hotspot had been found. They said, oh yeah, we found the hotspot. Yeah, sure, we found it.
So he's saying that this is cool,
He's saying that blue is cooling.
and that green is
Red is
slightly
mild
warmer,
cooling, yeah.
and then that this is,
And you reckon this was warming?
yeah.
But that's a departure from all the standards used in graphs like that, and all of the graphs we're comparing with, and here's a compilation.
This is the
of
IPCC. just
always,
before.
the story is the warm colours, the yellows and oranges are above 0 and the cool colours are below 0. I mean, that's one of those universal standards everywhere, and this has changed it, and it would appear that it's designed to produce a result which looks like this.
What's
By
Sherwood's
changing the
explanation
scale.
for this? What's he
I
saying?
don't know that anybody's ever asked him.
Really?
We'd love to ask him. We've invited them to the debate next month in Perth, but I think it's been accepted.
Okay, now
Right.
I think we've got all the colourways we need.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, am I going to be in your shot if I'm around there to get Anna and Andy?
No, I'll frame you up.
Okay.
Go for it.
Let's see. This goes.
Am I out of your shot?
You are. If I cheat that light back this way,
Yep.
so I'm putting Anna's shadow back on the
Yeah, that's okay.
grass, but that doesn't matter.
As long as David's looking okay.
Okay.
Am I saying in the right place?
Yeah. Okay.
Let's step back into
What's next? What do you
Um,
do next?
We'll let Anna have a response to those first four.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So just hold on a
Do you
second.
want to point to the graphs at all? Or just want to talk?
Yeah, we'll bring them out one by one so that there's something to talk
Yeah, we'll
about.
do this.
So this is Anna talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anna,
It's not about the graphs, it's about her thoughts.
No, but it's relevant to questions four.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just hold on a second. So are you happy there, Helen, with your?
Yeah, I can do.
And
Hang on, is this?
Actually, it's not bothering me, so
no, it's all
We're
right.
not picking them up?
it's not bothering me. You know, that-
It's
that- in the back.
Thought they were breaking something.
No, it's counting their money.
No, breaking things is much noisier than that.
Okay. I'm happy. You happy, Helen?
Yep, rolling.
Okay.
So thank you for taking the time to explain where you're coming from and to show me the graphs.
Thanks for listening.
You're welcome. There's so much that I want to go through in terms of the science.
It's difficult.
I've been reading a lot of science that contradicts what you're saying, so I'd like to be able to go through that. I've got a few things to show you there, but before we do, I was really glad that I was coming to meet you because I did read something on your blog a while ago that it upset me a bit. It made me a bit offended and a bit hurt because you were talking about the death threats that scientists have received, and you said that when rock star fame is waning, a highly publicised death threat is a way to win sympathy and keep the celebrity factor rolling. It also makes your opponents look like criminals. Convenient A. And then you said this is sheer beef it up spin in a new blog post, making a mountain out of a molehill, clutching at straws in desperation to eke out a PR victory from the dregs of a fading scam. And I wanted to show you both a death threat that I received, that to me was not making a mountain out of a molehill. We reported it straight away to the federal police. And I worry that some of the debate that's happening on your blog may be encouraging things like this. The comment section.
So where's the district?
So here it says,
Whereabouts?
you might want to read it.
Just whereabouts?
Just this one here.
Yeah, well, that kind of stuff is appalling, and I would never condone statements that suggest anything violent. I wish this debate was polite. The first and most important thing I put on my requirement for comments on my site is please be polite. I want good manners in this debate, because good manners are the only way we can stick to the science instead of getting involved in attacks on people, which is so not what this is about. We should be worried about what the climate's doing and what the data's reporting, not on things. And people are very angry, and yeah, that's a shame. And I never support, I never condone that kind of violence. My comments were made in relation to what was put out by the ANU and others in June this year in a hot political climate in Australia, and they were saying skeptics are making death threats, and we were saying, well, where are they? Show us the evidence. And what they put forward was a letter from 4 or 5 years ago, which was during the Howard government, before I started blogging and everything like that. One letter from 5 years ago, they put forward rude arguments, kind of similar, with lots of swearing. It's so unnecessary, it's so boorish, and I don't want people to do that. And they were 16 months old. So when I say that people are hyping up things, I was referring to a 5-year-old letter and 16-month-old rude emails, and the rude emails had no evidence of death threats. They were just very rude and unnecessary. So you'd have to agree that was beefing things up in that political climate. None of this was put forward. At the time when those things were released to the public and the statements were made, there were no reports to the AFP, there were no investigations, people were not following things up. You can see how easy it would be for someone who didn't like us to make up death threats, to throw them out, and then to say, oh look, the skeptics are being horrible. And we're like, well, can we just get back to the scientific evidence? And if there is a real death threat, then we want a real investigation, because those people should be prosecuted, because there is no excuse for doing that kind of thing.
Anna, I think you're right to be upset about this. We get mail like this reasonably frequently, apart from that line there. That's a shocker, that's what the threat there.
Yeah, well, I mean,
You should have reported that to police.
of course we did.
Yeah,
and that's what climate scientists have been doing as well. But I feel like
well,
Joe-
it's like say climate science, there's never been any evidence produced of that.
Yeah, we get very nasty
This is the
emails
first
too.
genuine death threat, or something that could be interpreted as death threat that I've seen.
I feel though, like what you wrote in your blog, this is sheer beef it up spin, making a mountain out of a molehill.
Don't you agree that issuing a press release about 5-year-old letters about a comment made in passing by an anonymous person and by rude emails that are 16 months old is sheer beef it up spin in the current environment, to claim that there are thousands of death threats and to claim that they're increasing when in fact the evidence is quite old? I mean, that's beef it up spin.
Several months ago, a climate scientist had a noose brandished in front of him as he was about to speak at a conference.
Where and when?
In Melbourne, it's on YouTube. I mean, this happened very recently.
Okay, and I detest those kind of things.
So
I want to get the violence out of
this.
this. I don't see why I can't be responsible for the actions of other people. I can only do what you do and say, we want a polite debate, we want to talk about the evidence.
But then writing things like this about when the
So if they do
waning,
wild
it
beef
just-
it up spin, I'm not allowed to say that it's wild beef it up spin. If the climate scientists stuck to reporting the genuine death threats, if there are any, and real investigations, and they stuck to saying what was out there, then I couldn't accuse them of spin.
I feel like you were insinuating, Ruth, that this is somehow people are sending themselves death threats. And I did not say that to myself.
No, and I'm not saying you did. As I said, you've put this in front of me now and I've never seen it before.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what the police investigation has turned up, if anything. And, you know, I hope that if someone did that, then they should be held to account for it.
I'm saying that this stuff is so common and it seems to be getting worse. And I am worried about places like, not the stuff you write, but in the comments of your blog, and some of the things that...
If you see a comment that you dislike, please let me know. I'd like to remove comments which suggest any form of violent intent, and I try to, to keep on top of that. I've only got volunteers, I'm not paid. As much as I can, I remove any threats of violence from both sides because to me it's just wrong. Should be about the evidence.
Okay, all right, well, it sounds like we both agree.
Is that something that we agree on? I mean, that's
It's got to
you know, about the debate.
Yeah, the debate's been shocking.
Yeah, I mean,
Tone has been
And
awful.
can we say
can you just talk amongst yourself about that? 'Cause that's-
you know, the idea that calling us deniers is name calling from the beginning. It's designed to stop people listening to any arguments put forward. If you ask people just to explain in English, what is it we deny, they can never name any scientific point or paper that we will not discuss. They can't name any empirical evidence for any warming greater than 1.2 degrees, and we have asked continuously, and on our blogs and around anywhere we could. No one can point to that kind of thing. No one can say we deny anything, and yet they keep calling us deniers with these illusions of Holocaust and sympathy with Nazis and whatnot. You know, I mean, that's the name calling that started out. That's been running for years. So when are people on your side of the debate going to start saying, well, hold on a minute, couldn't we just call them independent scientists instead of calling them deniers? When are we going to raise the standards on that side of the debate?
I think this probably goes back to a point about you, as you said, accept that carbon pollution or carbon dioxide.
I don't accept that it's pollution.
Well, pollution is a byproduct of production that has a bad impact on the world. Which
So
If
we
it
don't
did,
disagree,
and there's
but-
no evidence that it does, and
well, actually, I mean, you've got the Climate Commission, you've got the IPCC saying
You've
it's
got
beyond
lots of
research.
associations.
You've got authority, just like the Pope had authority. You can have the Pope himself on your side. It's still a battle of evidence which I've
Has
shown.
no expertise.
Anyway,
in
so
climate
what are they
science.
saying?
That's
What are
all
they
right,
saying
that
is
makes-
beyond reasonable doubt?
You know, you've got scientists, the vast majority of scientists.
No.
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 So,
No.
well,
We can name more scientists than you can. The Petition Project has 31,500 scientists named. It's been checked twice. It was done by
It has names
volunteers.
like Mickey Mouse.
It
No,
had
it's
names
not-
like that on
not
the
the-
first round, and you're ignoring the second round. 31,500 scientists have named it. It's been double checked. 9,000 PhDs. That's never really been reported to the public. It doesn't prove anything, okay? It's an argument from authority. Just because we outnumber you, we never say we're right because we outnumber you. We outrank you as well. We've got the Nobel Prize winners like Ivor Gieva on our side. We don't say we're right because we outrank you either. We just say there is another side to the argument. Can we put both sides forward?
The vast majority of scientists,
No,
97.5%
the vast majority of
climate scientists.
the climate, which was
Of
75
the government
people.
climate scientists in the Western countries.
Did they tell you that was only 75 people out of 77?
There have been numerous studies that show that the absolutely overwhelming vast majority of climate scientists
And they
who
can
are
name
peer-reviewed.
75 scientists out of 77 in that, and it was a 2-minute study done on the internet,
Online.
which just asked them if the world was
I would have
warming.
answered yes
We
to
agree. We say yes, it's warming. So, you know, that's inane
And
to
also, the
report to
Chinese
that.
climate establishment thinks it's a load of hooey. The Russians have always said it's rubbish and said it's due to the sun. The Indians disagree with it, and their national report
Where
on
are you
it.
getting this information on China? Because I was just over there meeting with people who are doing a lot of work on climate science in Beijing, and the government
They're accepting a lot of Western
absolutely
money.
accepts
If
this.
you go to a Chinese bookstore, however, you'll find books in there saying that it's all a plot against developed by the Western countries against developed nations.
There are
And
plenty
well,
of
that's
Chinese
a government
scientists.
bookstore, and they wouldn't be in there. I'm also basing it on what the Chinese said after Copenhagen. The Chinese were saying during and after Copenhagen, they were saying, we're not signing this agreement because we're not convinced that CO2 is the cause of the problem. That's almost a direct quote. They said it over and over again. So that's why I'm saying the Chinese aren't buying it.
I disagree.
Okay.
Okay, so, but, I mean, we have, when you asked, where is the evidence?
I do. Have you got any evidence? Can you name any? We have gone through this conversation for an hour now, and we haven't had any evidence from you, Anne.
Well, I was not really allowed to respond as you
Okay.
guys
All
were
right.
Your
doing
turn.
the graph. So,
Okay.
but I mean, so you've got climate scientists here saying a very large body of observations, experiments, analysis and physical theory points to increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, with carbon dioxide being the most important as the primary cause of observed
All right, that's evidence of a climate scientist. It's not evidence that
So-
CO2
so-
causing
So
it.
when
It's their
you
opinion.
say, I mean, you do accept that there's climate change impacts happening. And
We accept that climate change has been going on. It's been going on since the depth of the Little Ice Age in 1680. We've been in a warming trend since 1680, and yes, it's continuing to
what
warm.
are you, I'm not sure what you're proposing is causing this warming.
We don't
We're
have
not
to
proposing-
propose anything. We're not asking for billions of dollars and trillions of dollars in a scheme. We're saying, could we spend our public money, our taxation and other dollars on useful things,
So but
like medical research, instead of on solar panels made in China,
What you're
which
asking
aren't going to
for-
help the environment? Aren't you concerned if they spend billions of dollars on solar panels that they're not preserving any environment, they're not saving diversity, they're not making any difference at all to the global temperature, not one bit.
But you
Isn't
say you
that a
don't have
waste
to
of
prove
taxpayer money?
anything.
We
You
don't
say-
have to prove anything
Because you're not asking for it.
We're not asking for any money. We don't have to explain the entirety of how the climate is controlled by the multi-variable factors that to control our climate. It's a mystery. If we could explain that, there would be climate models which would forecast ahead of time when there were El Niños or when there were La Niñas coming. They'd be able to say, farmers, worry about this next season because the next season's going to be wet or hot or cold or something.
You're confusing
They
weather with
can't.
climate.
No, yeah, what is climate? Lots of weather.
Yeah,
Lots of
30-year
little
periods.
slices of weather. Do you know the climate models, when they come up with their 70-year predictions, do that by breaking things down into small time zones and small parts all around the planet. They then figure out what goes on in each small bit and they add up all the small bits to come up with a long-term answer. Now, if they get all the small bits wrong, all their predictions of local rainfalls and temperatures and things are wrong, how can you add up thousands of errors on a global model and come up with an answer that's right?
So you're saying that because you're not asking for money, you don't have to prove anything?
No, we're saying CO2 didn't do it, we've got the evidence to show it.
Well, they're saying we
also
can
putting in
prove the
here, we've got
models
the
are wrong and that this is a baseless scare and a waste of money.
I feel like actually you're asking for quite a lot, which is for the world to take a huge gamble and choose not to act on the very small chance that you might be right. That's asking
Yes.
for
Very
much.
small. We've presented 4 bits of evidence here that the climate models are fundamentally flawed. They're
Well,
totally wrong.
And if you look at it the other way, Anna, that we're being asked to take a huge gamble that those who assert that our emissions are warming the planet dangerously are right.
So if
Because they want to change the whole industrial system
But
and eradicate.
Nick-
So, no, I'm just saying, just looking at the way this is presented, the onus is actually on those who assert that the warming that's occurred is caused by our emissions and is dangerous and that we have to do something about it.
Well, the
Hang on, why is
IPCC
it
has
so?
said that there's 90%
But do you accept that that is the
probability-
onus?
Well, the IPCC said that there's 90% probability, so yet not 100% chance that climate change is happening and that it's human.
And they came up with a
And
number
if
by
it's-
asking a room full of people to put up their hands. It's a bunch of opinions. It's not based on
Who
observation.
pays those people?
Sorry, Anna, can you start that again,
Yeah,
Nick?
sure. So the IPCC has said that there's a 90% probability
Yes.
that climate change is happening and that
That
it's
is what
caused
they
by
say.
humans.
Yep.
So there's a chance that they're wrong. But if we take that gamble and don't act, the consequences are that we destroy the entire planet. Or
Well,
we could,
no.
actually I don't think it's funny because
Sorry.
I'm still going to be alive and your kids are going to be
The
alive and
planet
we
is
have
not
to-
going to be destroyed.
Anna, there's no evidence for it. We've showed you the climate models in
no.
4 different independent ways. We've showed you the climate models are fundamentally flawed. They haven't got a clue what's going on about carbon dioxide. What's the problem?
So we could bet the whole house on the chance that you're right, or we could insure the house.
Well,
in
we
case
could bet
you're
the
wrong.
whole house and see if the temperature goes up. Let's see, the air temperatures haven't gone up according to the satellites. Our best means of measuring air temperatures haven't gone up since 2001. And since we started measuring the oceans properly in 2003, those temperatures haven't gone up either.
Surface temperatures have increased and ocean temperatures.
Surface
According to the
temperatures
dodgy
have been
thermometers, yes, but
increasing
according to
for
the satellites in the
300
Argo, no.
Surface temperatures have been increasing for 300 years. It started long before we got SUVs and long before coal-fired power stations. Those temperatures have been going up. Something else caused it to start warming. Maybe that slowed down while our natural forces have come in. That would be a coincidence. You're asking us to bet lots of money on a coincidence which isn't backed by any of the other observational evidence we can point at. 28 million weather balloons, 6,000 boreholes, 3,000 Argo buoys, 30 years of satellite data. The evidence going back millions of years fails to show any strong correlation where CO2 causes major changes in temperature.
So, but you're kind of implying that climate scientists are saying that all warming in the past is caused by carbon.
No, I didn't say that.
No, and they don't say that either.
But we know that the ice cores do show positive feedback loops. So
No,
No, they don't. They haven't been able to prove that at all.
There hasn't been,
No, they haven't.
there
What
hasn't
they-
been any published papers showing that there is major amplification, nothing they can put a number to. They
There were
said
some
that-
papers showing some applications. They made an ABC error and it's wrong.
But you've got that graph yourself. saying
Yeah,
that-
yeah, we've got the graph, the Vostok ice core graph. As I said, I looked at that and I was convinced we needed to worry. We've looked at the problem, we know that temperature causes CO2 to rise and fall,
It's
and that
correlation.
most of this movement
It's a
is due
direct
to temperature
correlation,
pushing CO2
yeah.
up. Maybe there is some positive feedback from CO2 affecting temperature, maybe.
In
But
theory,
it
there must be.
has not been published in any peer-reviewed papers. No one's been calculating climate sensitivity based on the best data that we have, only on 20-year-old data. They're still quoting Laureus, 1990, when they talk about climate sensitivity from ice cores.
All right, well, let's talk about old data.
Sorry,
And-
can I just get Nick saying, talking correlation, not
Can I just
causation.
have like a 30-second break?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Yeah,
No.
good for me too. Good for everyone, I hope. Deep breath all round.
Doing well now.
Was that
By the way, we
okay?
get much
You
less
can
listening
have
all of the time. I mean, we're pretty used to it.
I realise I'm not splitting it.
Okay.
So the hotspot.
Hold on.
a- Wait,
We'll,
wait, now we're gonna roll some-
we'll have to roll some cameras first, probably. I'm not getting any audio.
And I'm just switching on here.
Okay. Lots of buttons to press. Sorry, I might just
100,000 people into our
I
kitchen.
might change it back.
I'm having fun here.
So what do you mean,
Try that
100,000?
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
suck it up. It's all right, you're not good.
They got a million for that Julia and Tim show.
Last night?
I don't know, we were talking about
Yeah,
the first,
yes,
I don't know what
you-
they got
you-
last night, but the first time, last week, they got a million people watching it.
I mean,
Which is
it
pretty
must
weird.
be tough being a politician and having that kind of.
Oh, I don't agree with them doing that, I think it's wrong.
You know,
Yeah, I think that crosses
Sort
the line.
of setting up a serving prime minister, whatever.
I haven't watched it, but I would prefer that.
Yeah, I don't think that's the right thing to do. That's what I'm amazed a million people would watch it.
But then I'd hate to
I think it's the car
take down
crash
free
effect.
speech, but.
Yeah.
It's the car crash effect.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted to
Yeah.
see how bad it could be. And it wasn't as bad as they thought, so probably.
No, they won't watch it this week.
I don't know how many new jokes
Okay.
they can come up with.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting told off by Anna about climate change.
Come on. All right.
Give me a bit.
Ready to roll?
And... Yes, let's go.
Okay. And. Okay, Anna? Yeah.
Okay, alright. I'm not a climate scientist, so this is coming
Neither am
from what I'm reading from climate scientists around the world and in Australia. One thing that I'm concerned about in terms of your hotspot argument is that the data that you're using is 13 years old, and that one of the, it was
Sorry,
released in
I think I've had a
2006,
mistake.
but it was used.
Sorry,
Sorry.
cut. We're going to take
Lost
the
it
issue.
somewhere.
Who's your last?
Oh, sorry, it's just one difference.
Rookie error.
Okay, where are you going?
Okay.
Are you going to stand, Anna?
Do you want to go?
Actually,
Yeah.
can you
Yeah.
oh, you know what? Actually, could you get a reverse on Nick looking at Anna, and I'll stay on Anna, just so that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Stand,
Nothing-
Anna. and-
yeah.
Well, you should do the reverse. I should have the...
Just because it's always been this camera on Anna, so
Okay.
it'll probably match more easily.
Yep.
Now you want Anna to start again?
Yeah, I'll get
Yes,
it in the
of
beginning
course,
again.
It's tiring.
Sorry about that. Nice to be sit, isn't it?
Okay, and we're on. Off you go.
One of the things I'm concerned about when it comes to your hotspot argument is the fact that the data that was taken 13 years ago. And one of the people who was part of that original study, a guy called John Christie, he was part of that study that cast doubt over the hotspot, and he has said, he's updated his views to say, previously reported discrepancies between the amount of warming near the surface and higher in the atmosphere have been used to challenge the reliability of climate models and the reality of human-induced global warming. This significant discrepancy no longer exists because errors in the satellite and radio song data have been identified and corrected. New data sets have also been developed that do not show such discrepancies. So when you have one of the original...
That was in the temperate zone, not the tropics. What I showed you was for the tropics.
But when you have one of the original people...
Yeah, that was for the temperate zone, not the tropics.
And when
What I
was
showed
that
you was the
comment
tropics.
made?
in a second study, so as far as I know, there have been 3 studies that have said that what you're arguing is wrong. One in 2003, 2005 and 2006.
Oh, they go on longer
There
than
have
that. They go
been
back and
dozens of
forth.
studies
There've
that
been
go...
quite a few of them now.
Yeah.
Every
these
6
are
months
just
someone
the-
puts out something on either side.
These are just the three periods.
No, that's old. That's temperate zone
It's
stuff, it's
very
not tropic zone.
But see,
Sorry.
they'll say that your data is old.
The data is old because the only data there is. You have to get the data during the warming period. The last warming period was 75 to 99. That's what the area. That's the period that the data covers.
Well, we can all see on the graphs that the world hasn't changed temperature much in the 2000s, so it would be kind of pointless to look for a change in the upper tropospheric warming zone during a period when the world didn't warm much. So when the world did warm, we agree, 1980 and 1990s, we can't find any evidence, and they have reanalyzed that data for that 20-year period over and over, And no matter how many different ways they adjust and look for cold biases and warm biases at the right spots, they haven't managed to publish a convincing study showing that the models fit with the observations. McIntyre, McKittrick and Herman published a paper in 2010 showing that the models disagree, but only by 400%. So it was huge.
I mean, Lincoln disagrees with you on this.
No, he agrees with us. We're in contact with him. He agrees.
Well,
That missing hotspot is due to lack of evaporation and the lack of the upper, water vapor layer pushing up into the atmosphere. And yeah, it's a huge discrepancy.
We'll talk to Lincoln when we meet him.
Yeah.
But I've seen a statement from him that I'll send you afterwards saying that actually this is no evidence that climate change isn't happening.
It's got nothing to do with whether climate change is happening. We agree climate change is happening.
And that
It is.
The issue is whether there's positive feedback. This is evidence to suggest that there isn't positive feedback.
Lindsay argues that trying to use this to say, this is my understanding, that Lindsay says trying to use the hotspot to say that there's no climate change and that it's not human induced is incorrect.
Oh, well, I haven't seen that, but we'll hopefully have a chance to put it to it.
We will put it to it.
Yeah, ask Lindsay whether he thinks the models are right
Yeah.
and whether their assumptions on the upper tropospheric.
Because that is his area of positive feedback.
It seems that what we were discussing earlier is, and as you have also said, that carbon does cause warming 1.2 degrees. And
Up to if it doubles.
And then what we're arguing beyond that is about feedback.
That's right. That's right.
So we're not disputing that carbon dioxide causes warming.
Yes.
No.
Does it
We're
cause dangerous
disputing whether
warming,
it's
and is it a
serious.
problem? Yeah, that's the real
Is it a problem?
It's not a
Well,
question.
how do we know? How do we actually know that warming is a problem? Why do you think this is the perfect temperature for the world? Why is it so horrifying to think that the world might be 1 degree warmer?
Because
Might be a whole lot better.
we've already had people in the Pacific having to evacuate from their islands because of
Which
sea
people?
level.
No, they're islands
Which
of
people and which islands?
There's a whole lot of... See, this is the thing that gets me, that there isn't the cost-benefit analysis of warming. For some people, warming will be fantastic. For lots of plants, it's going to be fantastic.
For food
For
production.
people who are trying to grow crops in cold places.
You're joking. You're not actually saying that if we have climate change, with the potential of runaway climate change.
No. So that's the debate. Would there be runaway climate change?
Or whether
I was saying, is it necessarily the case that even if it went up 1 degree over a century, that would be disastrous for humanity?
But that's not what the scientists are saying. I mean, here you've got the Australian Academy of Science, you've got NASA, you've got every national
Yeah, but they're
academy
basing
of
on,
science
this
in the
comes
world.
back to the whole argument, that they're basing on models that are saying it is going to run away and it's going to be 4 degrees
It's
or
not just
more.
about models, it's also about the real world.
it's about the
No,
opinions of
it's about
scientists and associations. None of those associations surveyed their members and asked the thousands of members whether they agreed with the statements put forward by those associations. Those associations are just committees of 6 to 8 people who have an opinion. They've all sat around a table and the 6 to 8 of them said, yes, we think this is the case, and put out a statement on behalf of something like the American Physical Society. Ivor Giavar today, Nobel Prize winner from 1973, he bailed out. He said, I'm out. I'm not a member of the American Physical Society anymore because their statement on global warming is untenable, it's unscientific for them to say the evidence is incontrovertible and there is no debate.
Anna, we might move on. Did you have another?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about the measurements.
Jill, you want to see reference? Sure.
The one I'm saying. Yeah.
No? Thermometers.
Thermometers. Yeah. So, firstly, as we briefly discussed, but probably didn't get on camera, the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia does take this into account. They used to have one in the centre of Sydney. They've moved it far out of the CBD so that it would be reflected accurately in data. So we know, and I'm happy for us to call them now and to talk to them about that, because I think that you're wrong in saying that they include these in the temperature record.
These aren't in Australia, this is in Urbana, this is in Ohio.
Yeah, so
Most of the
But
photos
climate
we have are from the
scientists-
US.
Okay, so climate scientists all over the world are aware of this and they do account for it. But then there has also been a more recent study that I'm sure you're aware of saying that actually it makes no difference anyway.
You saw that study too?
The well-cited ones.
You
and
can
the bad
statistically
cited-
combine big pools of things to come up with answers, and when you've statistically done all the tricks to say that, you can show that there's no difference from this class and that class. But you look at these and ask yourself, looking at this, do you believe that that thermometer is accurately measuring the temperature to within 0.1 or 0.2 of a degree, which is what this is all about? And how can anybody look at that and not say, well, you know, this is not very good science, this is not very good data, we have some question about it.
Bottom line is, Anna, these thermometers keep rise to a temperature record that's different from the satellites. These thermometers show it's still warming and that the warmest year was 2010 or 2006. We use the satellites, the warmest year is 1998, and the warming probably stopped in 2001. So who are you going to believe? The satellites that go around 24/7 and measure the whole planet, or a bunch of thermometers like that?
Are you saying that the world has, I don't think you said this, but are you saying that the world hasn't warmed since 1998?
I'm saying the warmest year, according to the satellites, was 1998. The warming trend stopped in about 2001 or 2. It's pretty much flattened off since then.
That's what the satellites show.
That's backed up by the Argo data for the oceans, which shows that it really hasn't been warming, it's been flat
So,
in the ocean data since 2003.
How do you explain this with this green line from NASA?
If you condense enough data down and you make the time span long, you're really not able to see any of the data here. There's 0.8 of a degree from bottom to top there. So this difference between them is about 0.2 of a degree between
That's
the
from
satellite and between the surface data.
That's 160
0.2 of a
years.
degree in
That
30
is
years
just
makes a
showing
difference.
from there on. And notice how the green one, this one, keeps going up more than the others. This is out there on its own, using those little corrupt thermometers,
Now that
and it's too
difference,
warm.
that difference might not be
They're cheating.
statistically
I really-
significant yet, but it's still a big difference on the kind of scales that we're talking about.
I would be careful about saying that NASA is cheating.
The satellites are run by NASA. Comes from the NASA and the satellite.
Well,
We're saying some parts of
the
NASA.
green line, which is NASA.
We're saying
Well,
that
some parts of NASA, well, a couple of those are NASA. Some parts of NASA are concealing the failure of the models by exaggerating the temperatures. And one way they do it is to use thermometers that are placed too close to artificial heating sources.
It seems, though, that you're focusing on some very small things whilst ignoring a big trend, which is about long-term warming in correlation with carbon dioxide.
Good, I was hoping it'd be a big trend. Here's the trend I want to show you. It's been warming since the depth of the Little Ice Age in 1680. It's been warming at about half a degree per century. And within that warming, there are periods of about 30 to 24 to 30 years of warming and 24 to 30 years of cooling. And that pattern has been consistent as far back as we can see. Now, this part of this graph here shows the observational data period from about 1880 through to the current day. That shows warming, cooling, warming, cooling, warming, cooling, about 25, 30 years each way. The last warming period was from 1975 through 2001. And the alarms models just extrapolate that. But what's actually happened is that it's now fading away. The warming stopped going up according to the satellites into Argo. And what's likely to happen for the next decade or two is that we get mild cooling if the pattern continues. So let's talk big trends.
No, let's talk really big trends, Don. This is
Oh,
my turn to throw
yeah,
out
come
this
on.
graph.
Half a billion
People
years.
call us, remember, we're called the deniers. Here's 600 million years of history. Sure, the estimates of uncertainty are enormous back here, but no one really disagrees that CO2 was a lot higher, 10 to 20 times higher back 500 million years ago. The world slipped into an ice age 450 million years ago when CO2 was much higher. The reason the CO2 has been coming down there is life on Earth evolved then. It sucked that CO2 out of the sky. We're carbon-based life forms. Everything on Earth is designed, living things, designed to pull that carbon out of the sky and turn it into plants and whatnot. The long-term history, we looked at every length of data there is. Remember, we're the cherry pickers, that's what we're called, and we're called the deniers, and there is no evidence we will not discuss and point to. There's no evidence in here that shows that CO2 is a major driving force of our climate.
You don't think that carbon is a driving force?
We don't think
No.
that carbon
Yeah,
dioxide is a driving
It's a
force
very
of our
minor
climate.
part.
We think it
But
is,
we
we
know
know
that
that
it
it's a
traps
small
heat.
part.
I mean, okay,
Yes, we know
this
that. Yes, we agree.
This is, which part of this equation do you disagree with? I
We
think I know,
disagree
but-
with the numbers.
Okay, so we know that humans emit greenhouse gases,
Yes.
including carbon.
Yes,
We know that carbon traps heat.
yes,
And we know that the world has been warming,
Yes.
surface, air and
yes.
ocean.
Over a period of decades, right? It's been warming. Yes.
Centuries.
Centuries, yeah.
So that's,
It's not a slam dunk. It could be something else causing the warming.
But
And the
what
fact
do
that
you
the climate
propose?
models are so wrong and fundamentally flawed indicates that it almost certainly is something else.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think that,
Quite up to you.
If you have any evidence, please present it.
Yeah.
If you've got any evidence at all that carbon dioxide is the main
That
cause
is
of
the
global
main-
warming, Please let us know what it is. So far, you've only quoted authority to us. You've quoted various authorities, admittedly scientific, but nonetheless, you're just quoting authority.
Admittedly scientific,
See,
and
the
that's what
evidence.
this debate is about.
Yeah,
It's about
but-
what's
The
science.
Pope had his scientists too. They disagreed with Galileo and they were wrong.
I don't know why you keep bringing up the Pope.
Because the Pope versus Galileo is a very old traditional case of the beginning of the Enlightenment.
So you're Galileo
Where-
and I'm the Pope in this
You're
debate.
quoting authority, I'm quoting evidence. And I don't want to return to pre-Enlightenment time where political authority and being politically trendy overrides scientific theory and, scientific evidence. And that is what I'm afraid is happening in this environment at the moment. We've got a huge name-calling campaign to suppress people who do point to evidence. We've got government spending oodles and oodles of money on propaganda telling us that we're wrong, and just to listen to them. And it looks like we've got massive political authority on one side of the argument and nothing on the other side. One side has got no resources, the other side has massive resources.
So what's the downside to taking action?
All right, good. I'm glad you asked. You mean as in
Yeah,
like a
come back to this.
precautionary
Yeah,
principle?
yeah,
Because
come back
people
to
quote that as,
Because-
why don't we take insurance?
Mm.
Well, what I said
If your
before
insurance
was
costs
about you saying
$100,000,
that we shouldn't act.
If your
And it-
house insurance cost $100,000, would it be worth taking?
So
There is a cost benefit to all insurance. What is the point of spending thousands of millions of billions of dollars if we haven't got any evidence at all that the models are producing reliable estimates of what's going to happen in the future?
All right, assuming that you're right,
Mhm.
even if, okay, let's use a really simple analogy.
Yep.
Most people take out car insurance every year. It's
Sure.
about $1,000. You don't get to the end of the year and go, damn, I didn't crash my car.
Sure.
So it's,
Sure. So if the guys who are selling you car insurance are saying you need to spend $50,000 to insure your
For
$50,000
1 year.
car, then you'd be saying, well, hang on, why? And then they say, well, look at the accident statistics. And we say, well, let's look at them. And then they say, well, we're withholding all the data. We won't give you the publicly available data on it. We're hiding declines. They get caught saying that in their
you're talking
emails.
about tree rings,
I
not
know.
temperature, and you're...
You're giving an analogy and I'm responding. If those guys said you need to spend $50,000 a year on your car insurance for a $50,000 car, I would ask to see the evidence. They hide the evidence, they won't admit it, they've been caught saying we're hiding things, we won't give out the information, we're hiding declines and we're using tricks, and they've said all that, and
Taking
you're
both
still
of those
saying,
things
okay, I'll
completely
pay
out of
$50,000 to insure my $50,000 car.
What can we use to buy clean air, clean water and clean soil?
Well, first we need evidence. We need to start with getting the policies right. Think about the precautionary principle. It's a bogus law of science. It isn't a law of science because it works for both sides. From our point of view, we're saying if you were to spend, as Obama is planning to, $3.4 billion on carbon sequestration, to pump carbon underground and store it underground, that's $3.4 billion which could be used to provide 46 million people with operations to cure their vision. So we're talking about 46 million people who could be cured of blindness, 100 million people could be given clean water, and you're choosing to say, well, we better stuff that carbon underground and let the 46 million go blind. What do you say to the mother in Tanzania who loses 3 kids to dysentery because they haven't got clean water? You say, I'm sorry about your kids. It was worth it though because we've changed world temperatures by 0.00001 degree in over 50 years. I mean, where's the fairness in that? And people throw the precautionary principle, but we can throw it back just as fast. It tells you nothing about what you should do. Only a cost-benefit analysis that looks at both sides is worth doing.
Feel free to throw anything back at me, but I think that you're setting up a false dichotomy. It's not we can focus on health or we can solve climate change. We need
There
to
is
do
only
both.
so much money available in the world.
Yeah, no, yeah.
You're saying, well, we should
You gotta
spend as
make
much
choices.
as we want, we can spend as much on insurance as we want in the unlikely event that something will happen. Do
Unlikely,
you have
then
insurance that an asteroid could hit your house?
The IPCC is
Do you
saying
think
that
it's worth
90%.
insuring that an asteroid could hit your house?
If the car that I'm about to get into after we leave your lovely house was having a chance, if engineers told me that the car that I'm about to get into had a 90% chance of crashing, I would not get in it.
Well, I'd
So
ask
we
the
have-
engineers for some evidence.
But your evidence is coming from people who,
Our
frankly,
evidence is coming from
What?
28 million weather balloons, 6,000 boreholes, 3,000 Argo buoys, 30 years of satellite data, 500 million years of the best proxies that science can put forward. Our evidence is coming from anywhere and everywhere and from machines that don't have opinions, they give us numbers.
Look, I can
Your
see-
evidence comes from people with opinions.
scientists,
From associations
You're saying
and from
science is
scientists and
opinion.
from models. A model is an opinion because someone has had to say, my guesstimate,
Everyone
my
has
estimate, my assumption, I reckon that humidity will rise to here and stick around for this long. Other scientists say, well, the humidity could rain out low, it could turn into low clouds that reflect the light. What if we spend $2 trillion, that was what global markets were looking at spending per year, turning over in currency trading on global climate credits, carbon credits. You know, it's enormous amounts of money. If they're going to spend that much money, shouldn't we be able to point to some instrument, some non-opinion, some actual recordings from an instrument which suggests we have something to worry about? All they've got are models.
Well, I would argue that they also have real-world observations and
But which
isotopes.
ones?
Okay. I think
Yeah.
that we've hit that intractable point again.
Yeah.
So,
We're all getting bugged standing here.
Yeah.
Can I just
Very
make
nice.
one more quick, out of, you know, all fair disclosure and everything statement?
Yes.
Was Anna talked before about funding from Heartland, and in all fairness, this is the
Yeah.
second Skeptics Handbook. I got some funding from Heartland to
Yeah.
help to support me for a couple of months while I did this. This was like, you know, 2 years
Yeah.
after I
Yeah.
became a skeptic. I just wanted to, you know, that's probably where Anna got the
Okay.
information from about this and put it forward. Seems only fair.
Yep. Okay. Yep. I'll
So we just let
Yeah. Yeah.
Joe make that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you held it this was funded entirely by us.
But
I
that's
said
the
the
first one I
printing.
did.
I said I was careful to say it was the printing that was funded. I do understand that you weren't paid for it.
Yeah. We'll shoot it just in case.
Yeah.
I suspect that
It'll
whole.
be irrelevant.
But I don't think it'll
whatever.
come into
But
it
let
anyway.
Joe.
You know, I think we've got
Yeah.
plenty of other science to discuss, and that the
Yeah.
funding was not probably the strongest issue. But we should get it just in case. So I am rolling. And
Rolling.
Okay. Look, in all fairness, I was given some funding, some support and help to cover costs and things to develop this booklet, which was
Which
the
is
second
number 2.
Skeptics Handbook that came out from Heartland. Overall, David and I have spent thousands on this. It's cost us thousands of dollars to run my blog, to work for 3 years nearly full time to do this. And the fact that I did this one for nothing pretty much shows that any intent I have in this is not about earning the money, invested interest. It's about getting the information out there. And, you know, whether or not I was supported by even, say, a Saudi oil sheik doesn't change the graphs, it doesn't change the arguments.
Not that you were supported by
If
the
you've got,
Saudi.
no, but do you know any? If you've got any criticisms, and I'm sure you do, of the arguments in it, then I'm more than happy to talk about that. But funding is just another ad hominem attack. It's got nothing to do with the evidence.
I haven't read this one actually. Where the bullies want your money.
Please have a copy.
Okay.
All right.
Because the other point, I guess we haven't had time to talk about today, which I think is really important.
Listen, Max, I would
Yeah.
like to come back here and get some
Okay.
pretty big whiteys.
all right. Well, look, let's do that. Look, just so you know, this stuff probably won't
Yeah.
make it, but
Yeah.
but please do keep talking about the issues because there's probably more
Pull
relevant.
this light back.
So just give us a
If
few
you just give me
minutes.
5 minutes where I'm just kind of getting shots to
You can have 2 minutes.
today.
2
2
minutes.
minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, because everyone's
I'm
pretty
happy
tired.
2 minutes too,
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all
Yeah.
getting on now.
Yeah.
I'm ready for the Moriarty's bar.
I know. We need to go back.
Just better.
Yeah,
I'll get out of your shot too.
Yeah.
How about that?
Didn't get around to having the bar.
Well, you guys are on
Well,
the largest around the world of this. It's-
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be tough.
Although I must admit, spending
Okay.
2 hours discussing graphs is only so entertaining.
Why don't you go to more?
I couldn't hear it.
Anna's uncle is up there on the property, and yeah, no, it was a good visit. It was nice.
Yeah, I went to Moira years ago.
For me, it's about well,
It's the effect on farmers.
that's why I care about it. Not so much about the whole bit.
And you can take one small step to
That's
your
an
left,
eye.
and
Yeah.
then one small step to your
Yeah.
right.
Sorry, this way?
Correct, Anna to your left, please. Thank you, David, to your right.
More?
Yeah,
Okay,
a bit more. And there we go. Thank you. Okay.
all right.
We're standing there.
I'm pretty far out, aren't I?
Yes.
It's like, I sound like I'm shouting from a long distance, Anna, but I'm going to make this point really, really well, with a great deal of passion and intensity.
Joe, you had a point you wanted to bring up. It's probably a good time.
Yeah, sure. Look, people keep saying that we're funded by big oil and they keep throwing the fossil fuel thing in. I guess it's fair to discuss those kind of things, but people very rarely point to the ones who are going to win if there's a carbon trading scheme. And this is one of the things that quite scares me, is that if we get, a global scheme, they were talking about $2 trillion turning over each year, the largest commodity market, bearing in mind it's not a commodity, it's just paper certificates for air over China. And the kind of money that's involved there, the people who are really going to win are the big bankers who've been pushing for this. The giant financial houses like Deutsche Bank and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are going to make money on every trade, no matter who buys or who sells, no matter whether the cost is high or low. They're going to make money because they're the brokers in a massive trading scheme. No wonder those guys are keen to push it in Deutsche Bank and putting out information booklets on the climate. There is massive money on both sides of this equation, but you can't say big oil has a huge impact and not mention the enormous pressure from financial institutions.
Anna, you talking our peers?
Have they been funding climate science research?
These financial institutions they've been funding lobbying on
Washington
and Congress and...
Anna, talking. Doesn't matter what we say. Just, Anna, talk to us. Tell us about where you live. Which city do you live in? Sydney or Canberra? Sydney, whereabouts?
In Randwick.
And it's just quite a big mortgage in Randwick.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Good luck.
Thanks. Yeah.
So what is it, Anna?
Bit scary.
Just Anna.
It's almost more than double what we were paying in rent.
Yeah.
It's just Sydney house prices are nuts.
Yeah. We're just so thankful that we got a break by moving here, and then suddenly we went from Sydney prices down to pre-bubble prices, and it's like, oh, we can buy a place for the same rent.
Yeah. My dad's from Perth, and I've got lots of
Oh,
family
okay.
in Perth and Mandurah.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I think there's a lot of housing bubbles around the mining sites.
Yeah. I think the housing bubble's going to collapse soon.
Well, you had a housing bubble here.
We did. No,
It hasn't
the
collapsed.
top's come off a little bit, but
Can we have Anna talking, please?
Oh.
Anna, tell us
It's
the
your turn.
Your turn.
Yeah, whatever you
Just
want.
put a cutaway, Anna.
Okay.
It's your
Well,
turn.
I guess the thing
Keep saying,
I do understand that you are very, very passionate and that you completely believe what you believe and that you're not saying it because you're being funded by Exxon Mobil or anyone.
Thank you.
Saying it. I understand that.
Yeah.
I think though that I can't agree with what you're saying because there's been so many scientists that have, I feel, satisfactorily answered this. I probably didn't communicate that particularly well because I'm not a scientist.
That's right. We understand that. All these arguments always come to that same point. We've written evidence. You go, oh, hang on, scientists can't all be wrong. We say, well, yeah, scientists are cheating as well and consuming stuff. You go, oh, bullshit. That's what the argument is to it.
okay.
Okay.
Pretty much how we today.
Thank you all.
It's not really fair of you to say that.
It's just
Leo.
being a bit facetious.
But Anna, I mean, recognise that when we ask for evidence,
Now, Leo, do you
you
want to...
keep saying, is an associate, is a scientist, there are
No.
97% of the world
But when I
scientists.
ask for evidence of what you think is possible, you can't provide
We,
it.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Anna. I know it's a difficult, complicated topic. We do appreciate you being, I guess, good natured about that.
Can I just ask, with the footage that you're taking, what will it be used for and can I get a guarantee that you won't put it on your blog and selectively edit?
yes, insurance, to make sure we don't have the same job as Sally Collins, Chris Maltnet, underneath by BBC Crew.
So,
This debate is so hostile, and I really wish it would be polite. And I write on my blog all the time about the importance of sticking to the evidence and about how it should not be about ad hominem attacks. So I look like a real hypocrite if I turned around and did an ad hominem attack on someone, because to me this should be, the climate's important and we should be discussing the evidence and what goes on with it. We really just want to make sure that I guess we're not taken out of context and that our arguments are put in their full picture. Hopefully we never even use it.
so you won't be able to use that footage without me signing a release for it versus the usual practice?
Well, I mean, we've signed releases, haven't we all?
Well, we haven't signed, we've got releases ready for you to sign.
It's just the same
For this.
for everyone,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, but
so.
Sorry,
But
you
you-
said you
but
want
you-
me to sign
and
a
are you
release
seeking
on
a-
your blog?
No, we're
Well,
not
we
going to
don't
use it.
really, we don't want to use it. We just want to make sure it's insurance in case we got selectively edited and we get quoted as doing something which is out of context.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that
We
this
won't be using it at all
happens.
until the ABC airs this.
And
And even
hopefully,
then we might edit it. I mean, it's there as an insurance job.
hopefully this will
Could you-
be
yeah.
the first real documentary which discusses both sides of the story at the same time, which would be fantastic and that'd be groundbreaking. And that's it, that's the end of it, and we keep everything in the cupboard.
your concern is any editing of it, Anna, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I've obviously agreed to be filmed by the ABC and signed a release for them, but in terms of signing a release for you, we just rocked up and some man who I've never met, with respect, I'm sure you're a really nice person, but just suddenly comes out with a video camera and starts filming me. I haven't signed a release. I don't know who he is. I don't know why he's there. I mean, it's a bit creepy.
Yeah, look, I'm really sorry that it comes down to this. We're just called skeptics. We don't like to take on faith or trust. We just want to have a backup copy for our own sake to protect our reputations, and that's all we're using it for.
What if you were to agree in writing that, were you ever to use it, it would only be used in full?
Yes, that's
You
right.
know, that you give an
That's-
absolute guarantee
yeah, all right,
in
then.
writing. There would never be
Yeah,
put on.
that serves the insurance purpose
Yeah,
without.
it would only
without
ever show
you
in full.
back.
Maybe there's something you
Look
could
at.
draw up, you know, because that would be your legitimate concern.
I look like a
It was
complete
there.
hypocrite
Yeah.
if I
But if it's shown in
selectively
full,
cherry
yeah.
picked and edited
Oh, that's
you.
good. Yeah, that will.
Yeah.
That satisfies you.
You're
Which
right.
means you have access to it too.
If you
and-
guys
Yeah.
agree
And you
with
could
the-
draw up it up, you know, whatever agreement you want signed, that they would only ever use it, you know, hopefully they'd never use it, but it would only ever be used in full,
Mhm.
you know, and they'd be in breach of.
Well, if you're happy to agree that you're only using
Yeah,
it
yeah.
for-
We'll write it up now and sign it. Do you want to do it? Can we start? After we do it.
Well, we can do it at the end.
Yeah, fine.
Okay,
Because we don't belong anymore.
yeah. Sure, that's great. Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right.
And hi, I don't believe we've actually met,
Oh,
but if
sorry,
you're going to
Barry,
film
talk.
us-
Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Rose. Barry.
Good to meet you.
Barry?
Yep.
What was your last name?
Cork.
Barry Hock. Hi. And I guess you know everyone else.
Yep. No, I haven't actually met Nick. I've been busy with the camera.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah.
No, I think-
If it's made available to anyone apart from us, the whole thing goes. It's not edited in any way.
Yeah,
Well,
Right. So it's either a full recording of everything that happened or
that's
not.
right, that's right, that's it. That's all we want.
Okay.
Great.
Guys, I might just stop for a second and get where everyone's standing.
Yep.
Helen?
Doesn't worry me which way,
Don't worry you.
flip side here, but yeah, just ask them a little bit of space.
Sorry,
maybe, so,
yeah.
know,
Yeah,
so
sure.
that-
And
If that's
so
okay,
maybe
yeah.
to your left, here, if you can be on this side.
Tiny bit around.
And thank you very much. And the two of you like to be with us together, please?
Oh,
No, just
sorry, yeah.
together.
Don't
we're going to do this all standing up, I think.
I don't think we'll be here that long if you're comfortable.
well,
Yeah,
we've
maybe.
only, got
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's fine, I can manage that.
Just have a little break to go and fetch the kids from school.
Right.
Now, phones off, everyone?
Yeah.
Mine's on silent. Should I turn it
Silence,
on?
okay.
Okay.
Barry, are you positive, could you come to that position in the middle there by any chance? Is that going to be,
Sorry.
can you come up just onto the level there?
The camera.
Yeah.
So you're
Is that
doing
are
a
you going to
shot,
fit
yes.
there? Yeah, just so
Yeah,
you're not in
we
the
can.
background of Joe's shot.
As handsome as you are, Barry.
Sorry.
So you're not in the shot?
Oh, well, I can keep out of the way down here.
Oh, okay, we can just put the camera up here, is that
Oh,
okay? Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. We moved here from Perth in 2003 before the housing bubble had taken off in Perth.
Okay.
We moved from Canberra to houses with an apartment in blocks and came here for $200,000. We were going to rent and we go, oh, we can buy.
Yeah, it was, yeah, that's changed.
Yeah.
You guys both Perth? Born and
I
bred?
grew up in Perth. David has grown up in the US and the
Oh,
UK
right.
and Sydney
Okay.
and Canberra.
Right.
Great
Got the
stuff.
world
It's
covered.
really good, actually. I like it.
Do I? Yeah. Okay.
Helen, just so you know, my shot of Nick's quite profiling, so I don't have
Yeah.
a
And we're
profile.
going right next to that.
It's my best profile.
Your best profile,
Sitting
actually.
beside.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's anything we can do about that. We can just go with it.
Before we get started, maybe, sure. Speaking of housing bubbles, I was interested in one of the things that you were writing around banking and inflation and how that's linked to. Sorry.
I might interrupt just
Oh,
so we can get into it. Yeah.
Okay,
But
sorry.
Come back to that.
Wasting time.
Well, we've got to pick up the kids at about 5 to 10 to 3.
Okay.
So we can
yeah.
now off
We
camera.
can do
Yeah.
things after they come back, but it'll take 10
Yeah.
minutes to
So
get
you
them
can
to
be
come
right.
back. So,
Give me
It's
David to
nice
start
to
with.
explore.
yeah.
David, I'm just wondering, just to start off with,
Yeah.
can you tell Anna about your background, starting with the fact that you were a climate believer and involved in the Greens? Helen, is Barry okay over there, or do you want him to come up where Leo is? Just he's right in the
Oh, sorry.
maybe up where Leo is.
Behind here.
Yeah, up where with Leo. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, you're good there.
Let's see with Leo over here, mate.
Okay.
I'm right.
Okay.
And I used to work for the Department of Climate Change, or it was back then the Australian Greenhouse Office, for about 5 or 6 years doing carbon modelling for them. And I was out there to save the planet. I was also a member of the Labor Party on and off for 15 years. I was a member of Greenpeace. So I was a believer. I thought I was saving the planet, and I thought this problem was a really momentous one that needed solving straight away. As the years went by, I found out more evidence. The evidence supporting it drifted away, and then evidence started accumulating that the man-made hypothesis wasn't true, and so I changed my mind.
Okay. I've read that you were a rocket scientist, but then I couldn't actually find that you worked on rockets. But can you explain?
Yeah, that's Alan, they had an ad com site called DSMOG. Yes, I did introduce myself as a rocket scientist in an article I wrote for The Australian. The term rocket scientist was used at least when I was there at Stanford University and a few of the major US universities, to mean someone who did a technical degree, one of the hard sciences, such as electrical engineering, a loaded PhD, and at one of the 4 or 5 leading US institutions.
Okay, but you haven't actually worked with rockets.
No.
Okay.
Although I did do an interview with JPL.
Okay.
Yeah, I might let David. Do you want these guys down this way a little bit?
Fraction,
Yeah,
I mean,
just
they are,
see back
only
there.
a touch, just a touch.
Yeah, okay, great.
Let's just go with,
Yeah, fabulous. So, I mean, David, maybe, sorry, I'll let Joe actually. Joe, can you talk to me about your background? Well, sorry, first I'll let David tell us about the period over which your views changed.
Yeah, did they change
Oh,
when you were at the Greenhouse Office?
You know, you sort of told me that...
Well, I was aware of the evidence piling up while I was at the Greenhouse Office, but frankly, I didn't really think very much about it. I was sort of in an environment where you just got on with the job. You know, as Al Gore quoted up from Sinclair, it's difficult to make a man understand something if his job depends on not understanding it. But when I finished with the Greenhouse job, which I did for other reasons, I finished it for other reasons. And when I finished it, I did look into it a little bit more, and I noticed that the evidence wasn't right. And somewhere around 2006 or so, I noticed it really was quite wrong. And Joanne was a believer at that stage.
I was actually a member of the Australian Greens. It's the only political party I've ever been a member of. So I'm like you, Anna, in that I am concerned about the environment. I'm concerned about doing things sustainably. I'm worried about the country that we leave for our kids. And, you know, I applaud you for going out there and doing something to follow what you believe in. I mean, congratulations. If only everyone was as active in doing things to make the world a better place. And I even spoke on ABC Radio about how we should be concerned about carbon dioxide and feedback effects. As the ocean warms, it'll release more CO2. And then David came to me one day. I'd stepped out of things, taken maternity leave and stopped paying attention to the debate. And David comes to me one day and he says to me, he says, you know, there's no evidence left to support the great global warming scare. And I said, you must be kidding. You've got to be crazy. Of course there is. What about the ice cores? And you would have known the ice cores, wouldn't you? And you've seen the ice core graph. There's one from Vostok. You can't look at this graph and not say, wow, there's something going on with temperature and CO2. We can see clearly that it rises and falls together. You have to look at this when this information came out in the early 90s and late 80s and say, wow, we need to look at this and study it. What shocked me was when David said, not only has it been well studied and we've got better data, but the better data shows that the CO2 rises 800 years after the temperature, and that's not controversial, and that's been published in 5 or 6 of the top leading journals between 1999 and 2003. So I downloaded the data and I graphed it. And if we take this point here 130,000 years ago, it's the first big kind of warming peak in the past, you can see that temperatures rise first, that CO2 comes up second. You can see that CO2 stays level for 15,000 years while temperatures fall. There just isn't a strong connection in these graphs. And in fact, the only real connection, which is explained in here, is that temperature controls CO2. And it's obvious that temperature controls CO2, heats the oceans, releases the CO2, and then as the world cools, because of other reasons, CO2 gets absorbed again. Maybe there's a small amplification in there, but it hasn't been shown mathematically, it hasn't been published in peer-reviewed research. You know, I looked at this and thought, wow, this doesn't disprove the whole great global warming thing on its own. There's lots of other evidence we use to do that. But for us,
Right.
I know this. Yep.
Can I just fine-tune your stance a little bit?
Yep, sure.
So you just need to be in this space this way. So
Which way?
so instead of being your shoulder like that,
Yeah, I'm blocking you.
I can be shoulder up.
Sure. Yep.
should we put one of the fighters off the hook? in another room.
Could be an emergency call.
Okay,
Joe, can I just slide you both back down that way a little bit? Just sliding up. And
I'll just pick up one more point and then I'll
yeah,
finish.
sure. Just slide back a bit to do it. And maybe with those graphs, would it be best if they sort of turn them around so that Nick and Anna can both?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
The audience.
Yeah.
Correct.
All right, well, I guess you never showed us turning around.
Yeah, okay, go for it.
Wouldn't mind any repeats on that one.
Sure.
Okay. For me, the big issue with this is not that it single-handedly disproves the argument, because it doesn't. There's a lot of other evidence. But what shocked me about this was that I hadn't read about it in any of the popular science magazines that I read all the time. I thought I knew stuff about this debate, and this floored me, because suddenly I realised that there was a lot that was going on behind the scenes that wasn't being reported. So I guess it was the half-truths that really got to me, that kind of undermined my belief that I understood what was going on with the climate and with the story we were being told.
So you were of the view that warming is happening and we are seeing climate change
Yes,
impacts.
and that carbon is a greenhouse, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and that adding more to it will warm the planet. Yes, absolutely, that's all well proven, solid science, known for years. Yes, I have no disagreement with any of that. The disagreement is with how much warming there is.
Yeah.
Is it going to be a catastrophe, or is it going to be 0.5 of a degree? And as far as we can see, the evidence, the empirical evidence, and there's lots of it, all seems to point to it being around about half a degree to maybe 1 degree with CO2 doubling, which is not the catastrophic projections that are coming out from the climate models.
So you said that with at the moment we're 40% more CO2 than pre-industrial revolution.
Yes,
38, 40%
well,
roughly.
yes,
So you said
100 ppm.
That if we go up 10% more, you said that we will see a 1.2 degree warming.
No, if it doubles from pre-industrial levels, so it's 280 to 560 ppm.
Then
At the moment we're at 390, we're a long way off that doubling, and going up at about 2 ppm a year.
So, but you have said that carbon could lead to warming at 1.2 degrees Celsius.
If it does.
If CO2 doubles
Yeah,
from
that's right.
pre-industrial times, 1.2 is the maximum that there's any evidence to support. That would be the direct effects of CO2, according to the physics that we know of, that is well proven, that CO2 absorbs and re-emits.
Yeah.
Infrared.
But having admitted that carbon does lead to warming
Sure.
and up to, as in your opinion, 1.2 degrees, I'm wondering why you're still putting out the handbook that says that the impact of carbon is unmeasurable. Because obviously that's where you said here.
Because so far we've had 0.7 of a degree due to all kinds of factors in the last century, and to argue that the effects we've had so far are unmeasurable, it's very difficult to unpick all the factors that are going on driving the climate and separate it out and say how much of this is caused by CO2 and how much isn't. I'm saying at most it's possible it could be 1.2. The evidence we're getting from the satellites and from the weather balloon measurements, for over 40 years of weather balloon measurements, show that we're looking more at about half that, and that's for a doubling. So that'll be whenever the planet reaches 560, if it gets there.
I've looked through your blog though, and
Just hang on a second, and I might actually, we'll come back to your questions, we'll reposition a little bit. David, you were going to take us through very quickly that summary of...
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Anna.
Sorry.
Wait a second.
Just a second. Thank you.
Talk Anna. Anna, we agree that carbon dioxide causes global warming. Every molecule of carbon dioxide that we emit causes some global warming. It's not a question of if it causes warming or not, it's a question of how much. So we get down to calculations. Right? And the calculations that tell you that how much warming is caused by the direct effect of CO2 in the atmosphere are well known. That's physics that's been done a century ago.
yeah, carbon
Okay.
plus heat.
Exactly. Now,
Dioxide.
the problem is, in the climate models, only 1/3 of the warming is due to that direct effect of CO2. The other 2/3 is due to positive feedbacks. And that's the bit we're arguing about. Now,
So we're just arguing, we all agree that climate change is happening, it's due to
Yes.
carbon pollution, but we're
No.
just saying about how
no, I agree
much-
that climate change is occurring, but I don't think it's due to carbon
Well,
dioxide
some
emissions.
small immeasurable amount.
Some very small amount is,
due to
but the
CO2,
majority is not.
potentially 1.2 degrees, but also...
If carbon
if
doubles.
CO2 doubles, if it gets to 560, the planet's not even close to 560. So we're talking about a theoretical future point in time with the 1.2 degrees, which came from James Hansen et al. 1984. We have no real beef with that calculation. It's a question of these feedbacks amplifying that 1.2 to 3.5, or in the case of Garneau, I think he's talking 5.9 or 5.7 degrees or something. You know, these are enormous leaps, and it would be quite a different picture for the planet if we're talking about 3 degrees or 5 degrees, as opposed to half a degree, which is closer to what we say that empirical evidence is showing us.
So you don't believe in positive feedbacks?
We don't think the positive feedbacks are supported by any evidence. The evidence all supports negative feedbacks, which would fit with almost every other natural system that applies on the planet. Most natural, long-term, long-standing situations have negative feedback, which is what makes them inherently fairly
So
stable.
counterbalancing effect.
That's right.
Yeah.
Any perturbation is matched by a dampening effect. Anna, do you know of any evidence that carbon dioxide is the main cause of global warming? Any evidence at all?
Yes.
What?
So we've got models, we've got...
Well, models isn't our evidence. Models are just computations. They're logically equivalent to someone punching a lot of calculations. I'm a model, I know.
Yeah, I know you've done a lot of data entry, so there is...
It's not data entry, Anna, it's calculations.
Wasn't that what models are?
Data entry is
No.
a great way to put down something.
No, well, a model is something that tries to, in the computer, replicate or mimic, is isomorphic in some way to what's happening out there in the real world.
Yeah. So
To simulate the entire climate
Your-
and
your
condense it
point.
down to theoretical calculations. It's a page, it's lots of pages of calculations, effectively.
Yeah.
That's what a model is. So it's someone saying, I reckon if we assume this and we estimate that, and we think this is probably the case, and we work within these limits, which we reckon are right, and we add this factor and this factor and this factor, and then we calculate it all, we get an answer.
yeah.
It's a theoretical calculation. It's not observational evidence.
Mm.
We're arguing that we need to get back to the real basics of science, and true science is based on observations.
Yeah.
28 million weather balloons have been released looking for things that the models have predicted and have found the models are wrong. They've proven that the models are based on flawed assumptions. So,
But in answer to your question,
Sorry,
Yes, I'm
sorry,
looking for any evidence at all. We're not looking for evidence of warming, we're looking for evidence that carbon did it.
sorry, just because we're going to run out of time,
yeah.
and I'd love to actually cover off the points that we discussed before, so that we've
I'll try and
got
do
those
that.
down. Sure. So, Anna,
sorry, I'll
let's
stop
just,
interrupting.
yeah. Nick, I'm just wondering, I know that Helen's probably just told you the opposite, but I don't have a shot on Nick's face at all, so I'm just wondering if he angles around a bit. Is that
make a
okay
much
with
better
you?
show?
Yeah.
Right, bit of space, yeah, that's okay with
Yeah.
that position
2
there.
minutes, Nick.
Can you
Yeah, I'll wait
angle
for
yourself
Which
towards
way
David?
Yeah,
you first,
sure.
yeah?
Is that right? From
Yeah,
your
of
point of
course
view?
I'm
Helen?
familiar with it.
Yeah.
I've completely debunked everything in
Sorry.
it. I can give you a copy of it if you like.
I read it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Well,
just
he's
this
debunked
appealing
it
to
as
the
my
debate.
version.
And
Yeah,
yeah.
To my skepticism.
can I push him
So,
down that
yeah.
way and push these guys along a little bit?
Yeah, they go back and forth.
It is.
Yeah.
He took 2
Can I
years
push you
to
down,
find
down
professors and I
that? Sorry
took
guys,
that,
just hang on a
so-
second. Can I just
Yeah.
push you up that way just a little again? We just have to make sure we don't slide down because
Okay.
I'll lose
You're
Nick.
getting
So
too
here-
close.
Yeah, you're good.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah, let's cue David.
now, David, you were going to run through.
So Anna,
Sorry, and okay, go for it.
there is no empirical evidence that carbon dioxide is the main cause of global warming. There's evidence that it's caused, there is evidence of climate change, there's evidence of warming. That's not evidence that carbon dioxide did it. Okay.
Although you accept that carbon dioxide does cause some warming.
Theoretically, we know it must cause some warming. Nick.
Yep.
Yeah. The only reason, and climate scientists will agree with me, the reason that climate scientists blame carbon dioxide is because of the models. What they've done is embody all the physics and all their understanding of the climate science in the models to simulate what's going on in the climate. Okay? So the reason we believe the carbon dioxide might be a danger to the planet and our emissions is because of the models. But the models are fundamentally flawed. We know that because we've now, over the last 15 years, collected several data sets in several different areas that contradict the models entirely. I'd like to quickly present you with evidence of 4 of those contradictions. The first one is the models have built up a track record. They've been predicting temperature for a while, and they've got a track record that goes back to 1988, when James Hansen, the father of global warming, introduced to the US Congress the whole idea. And here's a copy of his original peer-reviewed journal paper, where he's outlined 3 scenarios of how temperature increases over the years. And starting in 1988, he saw scenario A, where the world kept emitting carbon dioxide at roughly the same level as it was then, which is in fact the path we followed. But he also included a scenario C here, which is what he thought